The champagne glass shattered against marble, spraying crystal across designer heels and polished shoes. In that frozen moment, as a drunk investment banker's hand reached for the beautiful young woman's wrist, Mason Hale made a decision that would unravel his perfectly controlled life. He crossed the ballroom in 6 strides, stepped between them, and leaned close enough to feel her trembling breath. "Pretend to be my wife," he whispered. What happened next would turn a single lie into the most dangerous contract either of them would ever sign. If you want to see where this story takes them, stay until the end, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel glittered like a jewel box tipped on its side, spilling light and laughter across 300 wedding guests. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows over tables draped in ivory silk, where centerpieces of white roses and gold-dusted orchids competed with the sparkle of diamond necklaces and platinum watches. The bride and groom had spared no expense, and the result was a celebration that felt less like a wedding and more like a demonstration of wealth, a carefully orchestrated performance where everyone played their assigned role. Mason Hale stood near the bar, a tumbler of scotch warming in his palm, and wished he were anywhere else. At 32, he'd perfected the art of looking engaged while remaining emotionally absent. He nodded at the appropriate moments, smiled when expected, and kept his responses brief enough to discourage conversation. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, his tie precisely knotted, his posture suggesting the kind of quiet authority that came from years of making life-or-death decisions in operating rooms. Everything about Mason Hale communicated control, except for the barely perceptible tension in his jaw as his mother appeared at his elbow for the 3rd time that evening. "Mason, darling, have you met Victoria Ashford?" Eleanor Hale's voice carried the particular brightness of a woman on a mission. She gestured toward a striking blonde in a crimson dress, who offered Mason a practiced smile. "She's a corporate attorney at Morrison & Wells, Harvard Law. Such a bright future ahead of her." "Mrs. Hale, you're too kind." Victoria extended her hand, her grip firm and confident. "Though I should mention, I'm also on the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation. Perhaps, Doctor, Hale and I could discuss the cardiology wing renovation?" Mason shook her hand politely, recognizing the setup for what it was. His mother had been orchestrating these encounters all evening, each introduction more transparent than the last. "I'm sure the foundation is in excellent hands," he said smoothly. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check on something." He stepped away before Eleanor could protest, moving through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to hospital corridors and emergency rooms. He loved his mother, he did, but her relentless matchmaking had become exhausting. She meant well. After his divorce 3 years ago, Eleanor had appointed herself the architect of his romantic rehabilitation, convinced that what he needed was a suitable partner from their social circle. What Mason needed was space. He found a quiet corner near the terrace doors, half hidden behind an elaborate floral arrangement, and allowed himself a moment to simply breathe. Through the glass, he could see the city skyline stretching into the night, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there was his daughter, Emma, spending the weekend with his parents, probably already asleep with her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. The thought made him smile despite his frustration. Being a single father hadn't been part of his plan, but then again, neither had his ex-wife's affair with his former colleague. Natalie had left when Emma was 18 months old, trading their family for a position at a prestigious hospital in Los Angeles. She sent birthday cards and made occasional video calls, but motherhood had never suited her the way surgery did. Mason couldn't bring himself to resent her for it, not when Emma filled his life with more joy than he'd ever thought possible. "Excuse me, are you staff? I need another martini, and I can't find a waiter anywhere." The sharp voice cut through Mason's thoughts. He turned to see a middle-aged man in an expensive suit addressing someone behind the floral arrangement, someone Mason hadn't noticed standing there. "I'm not—" a young woman's voice began. "Don't be difficult," the man interrupted, swaying slightly. His words carried the thick, careless edge of too much alcohol. "Just get me a drink. That's what they're paying you for, isn't it?" Mason stepped around the flowers and froze. The young woman was perhaps 24 or 25, with dark hair swept into a simple updo and eyes that sparked with barely contained fury. Her dress was elegant but modest, a navy blue sheath that would have looked at home in any office, and she clutched a small purse in front of her like a shield. She wasn't staff. That much was immediately obvious to anyone paying attention. But the drunk guest wasn't paying attention. "I told you," she said, her voice tight but steady. "I'm not working here. I'm a guest." The man laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "A guest? In that dress?" He reached for her wrist. "Come on, sweetheart, don't make this difficult." Mason moved before he could think. "That's enough." His voice carried the same absolute authority he used in the operating room when a situation was about to spiral out of control. He stepped between them, and the drunk man's hand fell away from the woman's arm. "The lady said she's a guest. I suggest you apologize and find a waiter yourself." The man blinked up at Mason, confusion and irritation battling across his flushed face. "Who the hell are you?" "Dr. Mason Hale." The title did exactly what Mason knew it would. It added weight, credibility, a suggestion of consequence. "And you've had too much to drink." For a moment, the man looked ready to argue. Then someone called his name from across the ballroom, and he muttered something unintelligible before stumbling away, leaving Mason alone with the young woman he'd just defended. She was staring at him with an expression caught somewhere between gratitude and mortification. Up close, she was even more striking than he'd first realized. Not in the polished, calculated way of the women his mother kept introducing him to, but in something more honest. Her face held a natural beauty that didn't need jewelry or designer labels to command attention, and her eyes, dark and deep, suggested intelligence and strength despite the trembling in her hands. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Mason surprised himself with the firmness of his response. That was completely unacceptable. It's not the first time someone's made that assumption. She tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I should probably go." "Wait." The word left Mason's mouth before he'd fully formed the thought behind it. But as she paused, looking up at him with those remarkable eyes, an idea crystallized with startling clarity. His mother was somewhere in this ballroom, probably already selecting the next suitable woman to parade in front of him. Victoria Ashford and her Harvard degree. Someone else's daughter or niece or colleague, all carefully vetted and approved. Eleanor wouldn't stop. She never did, unless she had a reason to believe her matchmaking services were no longer required. Unless she believed Mason was already taken. The woman was watching him now, waiting, and Mason realized he'd been silent for too long. Around them, the wedding reception continued its glittering dance, oblivious to the moment forming in this quiet corner. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then answered. "Chloe. Chloe Bennett." "Chloe." Mason tested the name, found he liked the way it sounded. "I have an unusual request, and I need you to trust me for the next 60 seconds. Her eyebrows lifted. "That's not exactly reassuring." "I know, but I promise you won't regret it." He glanced over his shoulder, spotting his mother making her way through the crowd in their direction, her expression determined. Time was running out. "There's a woman coming toward us right now, my mother. She's been trying to set me up all evening, and it's getting unbearable." Chloe followed his gaze, then looked back at him with dawning understanding. "And you want to use me as a human shield?" "More like a strategic solution to a persistent problem." Mason allowed himself a small smile. "Will you help me?" She should have said no. A smart, sensible person would have politely declined and walked away. But something flickered in Chloe's expression, something that looked like reckless courage, or maybe just the desire to salvage something good from an awful moment. "What do I have to do?" she asked. Mason's heart kicked against his ribs. "Pretend to be my wife." Chloe's eyes widened. "You're what?" "Mason, there you are!" Eleanor's voice rang out, bright and carrying. She was 20 feet away, closing fast, with what looked like another potential setup trailing in her wake. "I want you to meet—" Mason didn't let her finish. He turned back to Chloe, leaned down close enough to feel the warmth of her skin, and whispered, "Trust me, please." Then he took her hand. Her fingers were smaller than his, delicate but not fragile. and they trembled slightly in his palm. Mason threaded his fingers through hers and turned to face his mother with Chloe at his side, their joined hands visible to everyone watching. Eleanor stopped mid-sentence, her eyes dropping to their clasped hands, and then snapping up to Mason's face. "Mason, what's going on?" "Mother, I'd like you to meet someone very important." Mason's voice was calm, steady, giving away nothing of the improvised chaos of what he was about to do. He looked at Chloe, found her watching him with a mixture of terror and trust, and squeezed her hand gently. "This is Chloe, my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor Hale was not a woman easily shocked, but in that moment her carefully maintained composure cracked like fine china. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Your wife." "We've been keeping it quiet," Mason continued, the lie flowing with surprising ease. "For Emma's sake, and for privacy. But I think it's time people knew." He smiled at Chloe, who was doing an admirable job of not looking completely terrified. "Isn't that right, darling?" Chloe's fingers tightened around his. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before, but steady. "Yes. We wanted to be sure before making any announcements." Eleanor's companion, a woman Mason vaguely recognized from some hospital function, was staring at them with unconcealed fascination. Around the ballroom, other guests had begun to notice the commotion, heads turning, whispers spreading like ripples across water. "Mason Robert Hale." Eleanor's voice had recovered some of its strength, though her eyes remained wide with shock. "How long has this been going on?" 6 months, Mason said, plucking a number from thin air. Beside him, Chloe made a small sound that might have been surprise or agreement. He couldn't tell which. "We met at a hospital fundraiser." "A fundraiser?" Eleanor repeated the words as if testing them for cracks. Her gaze shifted to Chloe, evaluating, calculating. "And you are—" "A teacher," Chloe said quickly, and Mason felt a surge of admiration for how smoothly she picked up the improvisation. "Elementary school. 3rd grade. It was perfect. Everything about it was perfect. Humble enough to be believable. Wholesome enough to pass Eleanor's judgment. Ordinary enough to explain why they'd never met before." Mason could see his mother's mental gears turning, trying to reconcile this unexpected development with her own plans. "Well," Eleanor drew herself up, her shock transforming into something that looked almost like approval. "This is certainly surprising. I wish you told me sooner, Mason." "I know. I'm sorry." Mason kept his expression apologetic, even as relief flooded through him. "We wanted to be certain before involving family." "And you're certain now?" Eleanor's question was directed at both of them, but her eyes were fixed on Chloe with an intensity that would have made a lesser person wilt. He met her gaze without flinching. "Yes," she said simply. "We are." The moment stretched between them, taut and fragile. Then Eleanor did something Mason hadn't expected. She smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her surprise. "Then I suppose I should welcome you to the family, Chloe. Though I have to say, my son's timing leaves much to be desired." Before either of them could respond, Eleanor pulled Chloe into an embrace, and Mason watched his carefully constructed lie take root in front of his eyes. Other guests were approaching now, drawn by the drama and the novelty, offering congratulations and asking questions. Mason answered on autopilot, his hand never leaving Chloe's, acutely aware that with every word, every smile, every moment that passed, he was building a house of cards that could collapse at any second. But Chloe played her part beautifully. She smiled at the right moments, laughed softly when appropriate, and leaned into Mason's side with a naturalness that felt almost real. When an older woman asked how he'd proposed, Chloe answered without hesitation. "It was simple," she said, her eyes finding Mason's. "He told me he didn't want to spend another day pretending we were just friends." The words landed with unexpected weight, and Mason found himself caught in her gaze, wondering how much of what she'd just said was performance, and how much was something else entirely. The crowd around them grew, questions multiplying, and Mason realized they'd created a problem far bigger than the one they'd solved. This wasn't just a small deflection anymore. It was a full-scale deception involving dozens of witnesses, all of whom would spread the news through their social circles like wildfire. He'd wanted to stop his mother's matchmaking. Instead, he'd announced a secret marriage to a woman he'd met 15 minutes ago. When the initial wave of attention finally ebbed, Mason guided Chloe toward the terrace, desperate for a moment away from the crowd. The night air was cool and sharp after the warmth of the ballroom, and he heard Chloe exhale slowly as the doors closed behind them. "Oh my God." She pulled her hand from his and pressed both palms to her face. "What did we just do?" "I'm so sorry." Mason ran his fingers through his hair, destroying the careful styling he'd maintained all evening. "That got completely out of control." "You think?" Chloe's laugh was slightly hysterical. "I just told 300 people I'm married to a man whose last name I learned 5 minutes ago. Technically, you knew it 15 minutes ago. I introduced myself when—" Mason stopped at the look she gave him. "Sorry, not helpful." "No, it's not." But some of the panic had faded from her eyes, replaced by something that looked almost like amusement. "Your mother is terrifying, by the way." "She means well." "That somehow makes it worse." Chloe leaned against the stone balustrade, the city lights casting her face in soft shadow. "What happens now? Do we just tell everyone we were joking?" Mason considered it. They could walk back inside right now, laugh it off as too much champagne and a misunderstanding. People would be confused, perhaps a little offended, but the moment would pass. His mother would be furious, but she'd recover. Life would return to normal. Except normal meant more setups, more Victoria Ashfords, more polite conversations with women who wanted access to his bank account or his social status, or the title of Mrs. Dr. Mason Hale. Normal meant watching his mother's disappointment every time another arrangement failed. Normal meant explaining to Emma, eventually, why Daddy couldn't seem to find someone to love. "We could," Mason said slowly. Or, Chloe turned to look at him, her expression wary. "Or what?" "Or we could let it stand. For a while. Just until things settle down." "You want to keep lying to your mother?" "I want to buy myself some breathing room." Mason moved to stand beside her at the railing, close enough to speak quietly. "Look, I know this is insane. I know we just met. But you saw what she was like in there. She won't stop unless she thinks I'm genuinely unavailable. And right now, she thinks I am. Because she thinks you're married to me." Chloe shook her head. "This is crazy." "Completely crazy," Mason agreed. "But it could work. Temporarily. We show up together at a few events, maintain the appearance for a month or two, then quietly separate due to irreconcilable differences. No drama, no blame, just a relationship that didn't work out." Chloe was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the stone railing. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. "What's in it for me?" It was the right question, the smart question. Mason respected her for asking it. "Whatever you want," he said, "within reason. Money, if you need it. Professional connections, medical care. I have access to the best specialists in the city." He paused. "You'd be helping me out of a genuinely difficult situation. That should come with appropriate compensation." He expected her to name a price, to negotiate terms the way anyone in his world would. Instead, Chloe laughed, a short, bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "For all you know, I could be a con artist who set this whole thing up." "Did you?" "No." "Then I'm willing to trust you." Mason meant it. There was something about Chloe Bennett that felt honest in a way he hadn't encountered in years. "Will you trust me?" She turned to face him fully, her expression impossible to read. "I need to think about it." "Fair enough." Mason pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? I'll call you tomorrow and we can talk through details. If you decide you're interested." Chloe hesitated, then recited her number. Mason saved it under a simple C before slipping his phone back into his pocket. "I should go," she said, "before your mother comes looking for us." Probably wise. Mason walked her back toward the ballroom doors, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Chloe, thank you for tonight. Whatever happens next, you saved me from an incredibly uncomfortable evening." She smiled then, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all night. "You saved me first. The drunk guy, remember? How could I forget? Mason opened the door, and they stepped back into the warmth and light of the reception. The crowd had thinned somewhat, guests drifting toward the dance floor or clustering around the dessert table. Mason spotted his mother talking with a group of her friends, and he saw the exact moment she noticed them returning. Her expression brightened, and she started in their direction. I really am leaving now, Chloe said quickly, before I get interrogated about our fictional wedding. I'll walk you out. No, don't. It'll just draw more attention. She squeezed his arm briefly. Talk tomorrow? Tomorrow, Mason confirmed. He watched her disappear into the crowd, then turned to face his mother's approaching inquisition with a sense of impending doom. What had he been thinking? This wasn't a simple favor between strangers. It was a lie with legs, growing larger with every passing minute. By the time Mason finally escaped the reception 2 hours later, he'd fielded approximately 60 questions about his wife, invented a proposal story involving a beach at sunset, and promised his mother that yes, she could meet Emma soon. The web of deception had expanded from a simple statement into an entire fabricated history, and Mason sat in his car in the parking garage wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It's Chloe. I'm interested. But we need to talk terms. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Coffee, the one on Oak Street. Mason stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. He could still back out. He could text back right now, tell her it was a terrible idea, apologize for dragging her into his mess, and face his mother's disappointment like an adult. Instead, he typed, I'll be there. The response came immediately, don't be late. And Dr. Hale, we need ground rules. Mason smiled despite himself. Looking forward to it, Mrs. Hale. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, that's going to take some getting used to. He drove home through empty streets, his mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's conversation. Riverside Coffee was neutral ground, public enough to prevent any misunderstandings, quiet enough for serious discussion. He'd need to think through what he was really asking of Chloe, what he could reasonably offer in return, and how to structure an arrangement that protected them both. The house was dark when he arrived, Emma still at his parents' place for the weekend. Mason poured himself a drink he didn't really want and stood in his study, looking at the framed photo on his desk. Emma at 4 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, grinning at the camera with chocolate ice cream on her chin. She deserved better than watching her father go through an endless parade of awkward dates and forced small talk. Maybe this crazy plan with Chloe could buy him time to figure out what he actually wanted from his life instead of what everyone else thought he should want. Mason picked up his phone and opened Chloe's contact information. Just C and a phone number. No photo, no details, nothing except the memory of her face in the ballroom and the feeling of her hand in his. Tomorrow would tell him if that was enough to build a convincing illusion on. Tomorrow would tell him if Chloe Bennett was brave enough or desperate enough to walk into his complicated life and pretend it was where she belonged. Mason set down his glass and headed upstairs, his mind already composing the list of terms and conditions they'd need to establish. Duration, public appearances, financial arrangements, exit strategy. But as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the details blurred into something more fundamental. The question of whether 2 strangers could successfully fake a marriage without either of them getting hurt. He fell asleep without finding an answer and dreamed of a ballroom where crystal shattered endlessly against marble, each fragment reflecting a different version of the choice he'd made. The morning light cut through Mason's bedroom window with surgical precision, dragging him from restless sleep into the harsh reality of what he'd done. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling before the full weight of last night's decisions crashed over him like a wave. He'd announced a fake marriage to 300 witnesses. He'd given a complete stranger his phone number and promised her compensation for participating in an elaborate deception. And in approximately 6 hours, he'd be sitting across from Chloe Bennett at Riverside Coffee, negotiating the terms of a relationship that didn't exist. His phone showed 4 missed calls from his mother and a text message that simply read, "We need to talk about Chloe. Call me." Mason groaned and rolled out of bed. Coffee first, existential crisis second. Mother third, if he could possibly avoid her until he had his story straight. He was halfway through his second cup when his father called. Your mother is having what I believe the kids call a moment. Richard Hale's dry voice carried a hint of amusement. She's been on the phone since 7 this morning calling everyone she knows to share the news about your secret wife. I thought you should be aware. I'm aware, Mason said grimly. How bad is it? Well, she's already started planning a reception to properly introduce Chloe to the family. I believe the guest list is currently at 75 people. Richard paused. Son, I know your mother can be overwhelming, but springing a wife on her at a wedding reception seems like punishing her for caring too much. The gentle reproach hit harder than anger would have. Mason set down his coffee cup and closed his eyes. I know. I didn't plan it. Things just got out of hand. Things have a way of doing that around your mother. There was a rustling sound. Then Richard's voice dropped to a quieter register. Is there actually a wife, Mason? Or is this some elaborate scheme to get Eleanor off your back about dating? Mason's silence was apparently answer enough. I see. Richard sighed. Well, you've certainly committed to the bit. Your mother is already researching Chloe's background. She found a Chloe Bennett who teaches at Riverside Elementary and has decided that must be her. Is she right? I don't know. The admission felt like swallowing glass. We only just met. At the wedding? At the wedding. Another long pause, then, unexpectedly, Richard laughed. Well, that's certainly one way to solve a problem. What's your plan now? I'm meeting her this afternoon to discuss terms. Terms. Richard repeated the word thoughtfully. So this is a business arrangement. More or less. And the young woman agreed to this? She's considering it. Mason rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. Dad, I know this is insane. Actually, I'm more interested in whether it's fair, Richard interrupted. To her, I mean. You're asking someone to walk into our family circus and perform for an audience that will judge every word she says and every move she makes. That's a heavy burden for a stranger to carry, no matter what you're offering in return. The words settled uncomfortably in Mason's chest. He'd thought about his own motivations, his own needs, his own desire for breathing room. He hadn't fully considered what he was asking Chloe to endure. I'll make sure she's protected, Mason said finally. Financially and otherwise. If she agrees, it'll be because the terms are worth it to her. See that they are. Richard's voice carried the firm edge of fatherly advice. And Mason, whatever you do, don't let your mother railroad this girl. If she's going to help you, the least you can do is run interference when Eleanor goes into full mother of the groom mode. I will. Good. Now, when are we meeting Emma's new stepmother? The sarcasm was gentle but pointed. Mason's stomach clenched. Emma. He hadn't even thought about how to explain this to his daughter. I need to figure that out. You need to figure out a lot of things, but start with being honest with this young woman about what she's getting into. Our family is a lot, Mason. Make sure she knows that before she signs anything. After his father hung up, Mason sat in his kitchen and tried to organize his thoughts into something resembling a coherent plan. He needed to be clear with Chloe about expectations, duration, and compensation. He needed to establish boundaries that would protect both of them from misunderstandings. And he needed to do all of this while convincing her that he wasn't a complete lunatic for suggesting this in the first place. By noon, he'd drafted a rough outline on his laptop. By 1:30, he'd deleted it and started over. By 1:45, he was in his car heading toward Riverside Coffee, still unsure what he was going to say. The coffee shop was a small brick building tucked between a bookstore and a yoga studio, the kind of neighborhood spot that survived on loyal regulars rather than tourist traffic. Mason found parking half a block away and checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. He dressed casually, jeans and a button-down shirt, trying to strike a balance between approachable and professional. Now he just looked like a doctor pretending to be normal. Chloe was already there when he walked in. She sat at a corner table near the window, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, dressed in jeans and a soft gray sweater that made her look younger than she had at the wedding. There was a mug of tea in front of her and a leather notebook open to a page covered in neat handwriting. She looked up as the door chimed and their eyes met across the coffee shop. Mason felt something shift in his chest. Recognition, maybe, or just the surreal acknowledgement that this stranger was about to become the most important fiction in his life. He ordered a black coffee and joined her at the table. "Thanks for coming." "Thanks for not standing me up." Chloe closed her notebook. "I half expected you to text this morning and tell me you'd changed your mind. Did you want me to?" "I'm still deciding." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I didn't sleep much last night. Kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong." "I made a list." Mason pulled out his phone and showed her the Notes app, where he'd cataloged potential problems in neat bullet points. "I'm up to 17 distinct disaster scenarios." Chloe's mouth twitched toward a smile. "Only 17? I hit 23 around 4 in the morning." "Clearly you're more thorough than I am." Mason set his phone aside. "Look, before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Why are you even considering this? Last night you could have walked away. You still can. So why are you here?" The directness of the question seemed to catch her off guard. She looked down at her tea, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug in slow circles. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "My mother is sick," she said. "She was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years ago. The progression has been faster than anyone expected. She's 56 years old, and some days she doesn't recognize me." Chloe's voice cracked slightly, but she kept going. "The facility she's in now is decent, but it's not great. The staff is overworked, the programs are limited, and I can see her slipping away a little more every time I visit. There's a memory care center about 40 minutes from here, Evergreen Hills, that specializes in early-onset cases. They have an innovative program, better staff-to-patient ratios, therapies that actually seem to help. But it costs more per month than I make in 3. Mason listened without interrupting, pieces clicking into place. The simple dress at the wedding, the immediate assumption that she was staff, the flash of anger in her eyes when the drunk guest grabbed her wrist. "I'm a third-grade teacher," Chloe continued. "I love my job, and I'm good at it, but I'll never make enough to give my mom the care she deserves. I've been taking on tutoring work, selling things I don't need, but it's not enough. It's never enough." She finally looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "So when you asked me last night what's in it for me, that's the answer. I need money. A lot of it, and I need it consistently, for however long my mother has left." The raw honesty of it hit Mason harder than he'd expected. This wasn't greed or opportunism. It was desperation wrapped in dignity, the kind of impossible situation that forced people to consider options they'd never otherwise contemplate. "Evergreen Hills," he said slowly. "I know the facility. I consulted there last year on a cardiac case. The director is a colleague. If you agree to this arrangement, I can have your mother transferred within the week. I'll cover all costs directly. You won't have to worry about bills or payments or insurance denials. She'll get the absolute best care available." Chloe's hands trembled around her mug. "Why would you do that?" "Because you need it, and because what I'm asking of you is worth more than money." Mason leaned forward, keeping his voice low and serious. "But I need you to understand what you'd be walking into. My mother is relentless. She'll want to know everything about you, where you grew up, how we met, what your intentions are toward her son and granddaughter. She'll scrutinize every word you say and compare you to every woman she's ever imagined me with. And that's just my mother. There will be hospital functions, charity galas, family dinners where everyone will be watching to see if you measure up." "Sounds exhausting," Chloe said. "It is, and it's not fair to ask a stranger to endure it. But you're asking anyway." "I'm asking anyway." Mason pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and smoothed it on the table between them. "I drafted some preliminary terms last night. I'd like you to look them over." Chloe picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the typed text. Mason had tried to be thorough while remaining flexible, outlining a basic framework they could negotiate. 1-year duration, she read aloud, with option to extend or terminate early by mutual agreement. Public appearances as needed for family events and hospital functions. Separate living arrangements initially, with shared residence to be discussed if necessary for maintaining the illusion. She looked up. "You really thought this through?" "I tried. Keep reading." Her eyes dropped back to the page. Financial compensation includes full coverage of specialized memory care for Chloe's mother, monthly stipend of $5,000 for personal expenses, and a lump sum payment of $50,000 upon successful completion of the arrangement. She set the paper down carefully. That's too much. It's not. Mason's voice was firm. You'd be giving up a year of your life to help me maintain a fiction that benefits only me. You'd be lying to your friends and family, attending events you'd probably rather avoid, and dealing with my mother's interrogations. $50,000 is the minimum you deserve for that kind of commitment. Chloe was silent for a long moment, staring at the terms he'd laid out. Mason watched emotions flicker across her face. Hope, fear, calculation, doubt. What about Emma, Schitz? She asked finally. Your daughter. How does she fit into this? Carefully. Mason had thought about this all morning. Emma is 4 years old. She doesn't need the confusion of a fake stepmother who'll disappear in a year. I'd prefer to keep you separate from her as much as possible. My mother can meet you, the hospital staff can meet you, our entire social circle can meet you, but Emma needs to be protected from this. That makes sense, Chloe nodded slowly, though your mother will probably push for us to be a family. My mother pushes for a lot of things. I'm used to holding the line. Are you? The question was gentle but pointed. Because from where I'm sitting, you created this entire elaborate scheme specifically because you couldn't hold the line with her matchmaking. Mason opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She was right. Fair point. I'm not trying to be harsh, Chloe said, but if we're going to do this, I need to know you'll actually protect the boundaries we set. Because once we start lying to people, it's going to be really hard to control where those lies go. You're absolutely right. Mason took a breath, choosing his words carefully. I can't promise my mother won't push. She will. But I can promise that when she does, I'll be the one handling it. You won't be alone in this. Chloe picked up the terms again, reading through them more slowly this time. What about the ending? How do we exit this without making it look like either of us is the bad guy? Mutual decision, amicable separation, both parties wishing each other well. Mason had rehearsed this part. We'll say that we tried to make it work, but ultimately we wanted different things. No blame, no drama, no burned bridges. We part as friends. And your mother will accept that? My mother will have to accept it, the same way she had to accept my divorce from Natalie. The comparison felt apt. She'll be disappointed, but she'll move on eventually. Eventually. Chloe's smile was wry. That's reassuring. Mason couldn't help but smile back. I should probably mention that my father figured out this was fake within about 30 seconds of talking to me this morning. Chloe's eyes widened. He knows? He knows, but he won't say anything. He's actually been surprisingly supportive. Supportive of his son entering a fake marriage with a stranger? Chloe shook her head. Your family is weird. You have no idea. Mason's phone buzzed with another text from his mother. He silenced it without reading the message. So what do you think? Are you in? Chloe set the paper down and looked at him directly. I have conditions. I expected you would. First, I want everything in writing, not just the financial terms, everything. Expectations, boundaries, what happens if one of us wants out early, what happens if things go wrong. I want it legally documented. Agreed. I'll have my attorney draft a proper contract. Second, I need to be able to tell one person the truth. Chloe's voice was steady but insistent. My best friend, Rachel. She'll know something's wrong if I suddenly show up with a husband I've never mentioned. I won't lie to her. Mason hesitated. Every additional person who knew the truth was a potential leak, a crack in the foundation, but he understood the need for at least one honest anchor. Will she keep it confidential? With her life. Then, okay, one person, but no one else. Third, Chloe continued, I want regular check-ins. Once a week, we meet and talk honestly about how things are going. If something isn't working, we address it immediately. No letting problems fester. That's actually smart. Mason pulled out his phone and added it to his notes. Weekly meetings. I can do that. And fourth, Chloe paused, her expression uncertain for the first time. I need you to promise that if this gets too hard, if I tell you I can't do it anymore, you'll let me walk away. No matter what the contract says, no matter how it affects your arrangement with your mother. If I say I'm done, we're done. The vulnerability in her voice made something twist in Mason's chest. She was asking for an escape hatch, insurance against being trapped in a situation she couldn't control. It was the request of someone who'd been backed into too many corners before. I promise, Mason said quietly. The moment you want out, we end it. No questions, no guilt, no penalties. Your mother's care continues regardless. That's non-negotiable. Chloe's shoulders relaxed slightly. Okay, then I'm in. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. They'd just agreed to lie to everyone they knew, to perform a relationship that didn't exist, to build an elaborate fiction on a foundation of mutual need and calculated trust. Mason extended his hand across the table. Partners? Chloe looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his face. Something flickered in her expression, resignation, determination, maybe a hint of dark humor at the absurdity of it all. She reached out and clasped his hand firmly. Partners, she agreed. They shook on it, and Mason felt the weight of what they'd just committed to settling over him like a coat 2 sizes too heavy. There was no backing out now. Not without hurting people, breaking promises, and destroying whatever strange understanding had formed between them in this coffee shop. We should probably get our story straight, Chloe said, releasing his hand. Your mother is going to ask questions, and we need to have the same answers. Right. Mason pulled out his phone again, opening a new note. Let's start with the basics. How did we meet? They spent the next hour constructing their fictional history with the careful attention of architects building a house. They decided Mason had attended a hospital fundraiser 6 months ago where Chloe was volunteering. They'd started talking during the silent auction, discovered shared interests in classic movies and hiking, and begun dating quietly to avoid media attention. The proposal had happened 3 months later during a weekend trip to the coast, simple and private, just the two of them watching the sunset. Your mother is going to want to know why you didn't tell her sooner, Chloe pointed out. I'll say I wanted to be sure before involving family. That's not entirely untrue. I wanted to be sure about a lot of things before my mother started planning another wedding. Was your first wedding a circus? My first wedding was a military operation orchestrated by my mother and Natalie's parents. 300 guests, 6-tier cake, live orchestra. It cost more than most people's houses. Mason's voice went flat with the memory. And it fell apart 2 years later when my wife decided she'd rather be chief of surgery in Los Angeles than a mother and wife in Chicago. Chloe was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. Don't be. We weren't right for each other. We just didn't figure that out until after the wedding. Mason set down his phone. What about you? Any marriage history I should know about? No. I was engaged once when I was 23. He broke it off when my mom got diagnosed. Chloe's voice was matter-of-fact, but Mason heard the old hurt underneath. Turns out he wasn't interested in signing up for the daughter of an Alzheimer's patient experience. He sounds like an idiot. He was, but at least he was honest about it. She smiled without humor. Better than stringing me along and leaving later. They sat in silence for a moment, two people bonded by failed relationships and complicated families, about to embark on the most elaborate deception either had attempted. When do you want to start? Mason asked. Well, according to your mother's timeline, we've already started. She probably has our wedding announcement drafted by now. She's already researched you, Mason admitted. My father told me this morning she found your school profile on the Riverside Elementary website. Chloe groaned. Of course she did. What else did she find? I don't know, but you should probably expect a call soon. She'll want to have lunch, get to know her new daughter-in-law. Mason paused. Are you ready for that? No, but I don't think I'll ever be ready, so we might as well get it over with. Chloe pulled out her own phone. Give me your mother's number. I'll text her first thing tomorrow. Suggest we meet for coffee. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. If I wait for her to reach out, she'll think I'm avoiding her. Better to be proactive. Chloe's fingers hovered over her phone screen. What should I call her? Mrs. Hale? Eleanor? Start with Eleanor. She'll tell you if she prefers something else. Mason sent his mother's contact information. Fair warning, she's going to ask invasive questions. I teach third graders. I'm used to invasive questions. These will be more personal than why is the sky blue? I'll manage. Chloe saved the contact and set her phone aside. What about moving in together? Your terms said separate living arrangements initially, but your mother is going to expect us to live together eventually. Mason had been dreading this conversation. My penthouse has 3 bedrooms. You could take one of the guest rooms, maintain your own space. We'd only need to be convincingly domestic when other people are around. That seems complicated. All of this is complicated. Mason ran his hand through his hair. But I don't want to rush into sharing space with someone I barely know. We can revisit it in a few months if we need to. Fair enough. Chloe checked the time on her phone. I should probably go. I'm meeting Rachel in an hour to tell her I've lost my mind and agreed to fake marry a doctor I met at a wedding. How do you think she'll react? She'll either think I'm brilliant or insane. Possibly both. Chloe stood and gathered her things. I'll text you after I talk to your mother. And Mason? Thank you. For the offer about Evergreen Hills. Even if this whole thing crashes and burns, the fact that you're willing to help my mom means more than you know. We're partners now, Mason said simply. Your problems are my problems. That's how this works. Chloe nodded, but Mason saw doubt flicker across her face. She didn't quite believe him yet, didn't quite trust that he'd follow through on his promises. He couldn't blame her. They were strangers playing house, and trust didn't come from contracts or negotiations. It came from time and consistency and proving that your word meant something. Mason watched her leave the coffee shop, her dark hair catching the afternoon light, and wondered if they'd have enough time to build that kind of trust before the whole arrangement fell apart. His phone buzzed again. His mother, persistent as always. Mason, I'd really like to meet Chloe properly. Can we have dinner this week? Your father and I want to welcome her to the family. Mason stared at the message, then typed a response before he could overthink it. She'll be texting you soon. But Mom, please go easy on her. This is all very new and I don't want her overwhelmed. The reply came within seconds. Of course, darling. I promise to be on my best behavior. I'm just so happy you found someone. You deserve to be happy. The words settled uncomfortably in Mason's chest. His mother meant well. She always meant well. But she had no idea that her son's happiness was based on a carefully constructed lie designed specifically to stop her from interfering in his life. He finished his coffee and headed home, his mind already racing ahead to everything that needed to happen in the next few days. He needed to call Evergreen Hills and arrange Chloe's mother's transfer. He needed to contact his attorney about drafting the contract. He needed to prepare for his mother's inevitable interrogation of his new wife. The house felt too quiet when he arrived, Emma's absence leaving an echo in rooms usually filled with her laughter and endless questions. Mason stood in the kitchen and looked at the calendar on the wall, marked with Emma's activities and his surgery schedule, and absolutely nothing about the fake marriage he'd just formalized over coffee. His phone rang. Richard again. Did she agree? His father asked without preamble. She agreed. And you're sure about this? Mason looked around his empty kitchen, thought about his mother's relentless matchmaking, remembered Chloe's face when she talked about her mother's illness. No, he admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. Then at least be smart about it. Get everything documented, protect yourself legally, and for the love of everything, don't let this turn into something messier than it already is. What do you mean? I mean, don't fall for her, Mason. Richard's voice was unusually serious. She's young, she's probably attractive, and you'll be spending a lot of time together pretending to be in love. That's a dangerous combination. Guard your heart because this arrangement has an expiration date. I'm aware. Are you? Because your track record with emotional boundaries isn't exactly stellar. Mason wanted to argue, but his father wasn't wrong. He'd married Natalie after a whirlwind 6-month courtship, convinced that intensity meant compatibility. He'd learned the hard way that passion burned out when it wasn't built on something solid. I'll be careful, Mason promised. See that you are. And Mason, that girl is putting an enormous amount of trust in you. Don't betray it. After his father hung up, Mason sat in his study and pulled up Evergreen Hills' website. The facility was exactly as he remembered, modern, professional, focused on dignity and quality of life for patients with degenerative conditions. He composed an email to the director, explaining that he had a patient referral who needed immediate placement, and could they please call him at their earliest convenience. Within an hour, his phone rang. By the end of the conversation, Chloe's mother had a room reserved and an assessment scheduled for Tuesday morning. Mason would cover all costs directly through a private arrangement, bypassing insurance entirely. It was the easiest money he'd ever spent, and the weight of it didn't feel like burden. It felt like the first honest thing he'd done in this entire mess, using his resources to help someone who genuinely needed it, no strings attached beyond the ones Chloe had already agreed to. He texted her the details. Your mother has a room at Evergreen Hills, assessment scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. I'll have my assistant send you the paperwork. The response took several minutes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. We're partners, remember? Partners who barely know each other. We'll fix that. Weekly meetings, like you said. First one is Wednesday, my office at the hospital. We can grab lunch after. You're very efficient. I'm a surgeon. Efficiency is my default setting. Is that supposed to be comforting? Is it working? Ask me again after I survive dinner with your mother. Mason smiled despite himself. Chloe had a dry humor that emerged when she relaxed, a sharp edge underneath the quiet dignity. He found himself looking forward to discovering what other layers she'd reveal as they spent more time together. Then he remembered his father's warning and pushed the thought away. This was business. Complicated, unconventional business, but business nonetheless. Whatever he learned about Chloe Bennett over the next year, he needed to remember it was in service of a temporary arrangement, not a real relationship. His phone buzzed with a new message from Chloe. Rachel thinks I'm either crazy brave or just crazy. She wants to meet you. Is that your one honest person? That's her. Fair warning, she's protective and has zero filter. I can handle protective friends. We'll see. She's already planning an interrogation. Mason leaned back in his chair, feeling the pieces of his elaborate fiction clicking into place. In less than 24 hours, he'd gone from desperate improvisation at a wedding to coordinating medical care, drafting contracts, and preparing to meet his fake wife's best friend. The speed of it should have terrified him. Instead, he felt something almost like relief, the sensation of moving forward instead of being paralyzed by indecision and his mother's expectations. His phone rang, Eleanor finally calling instead of texting. Mason, I just got the sweetest message from Chloe, his mother said, her voice warm with approval. She suggested we meet for lunch tomorrow. I'm so pleased she's making an effort. She's nervous about meeting you, Mason said honestly. So please, Mom, don't overwhelm her. I won't. I just want to get to know my daughter-in-law. Is that so terrible? No, but your version of getting to know someone sometimes feels like a deposition. Eleanor laughed. I promise to be gentle, but Mason, I do have some questions for you. Here it comes, Mason thought. What do you want to know? Everything. How you met, why you kept it secret, what she's like with Emma, what your plans are. You can't just announce you're married and expect me not to be curious. Mason spent the next 20 minutes answering his mother's questions with the carefully constructed story he and Chloe had built. The hospital fundraiser, the quiet dating, the beach proposal. With each answer, the fiction became more solid, more real, until Mason almost believed it himself. When he finally got off the phone, he felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with his surgery schedule. Lying was hard work, especially to people you loved. He checked his messages one last time before heading to bed and found another text from Chloe. Just told Rachel everything. She called you either a genius or a sociopath. Jury's still out. Then she made me promise to introduce you within the week. Tell her I'm free Friday evening. We can do dinner somewhere casual. You sure you want to meet my suspicious best friend? If we're going to sell this to the world, we should probably be able to sell it to the people who know us best. Fair point. Friday it is. Mason set his phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling, his mind refusing to quiet. In 5 days, his daughter would be home from his parents' house. In 5 days, he'd have to explain why Daddy's friend Chloe was suddenly going to be around more often. In 5 days, the comfortable distance between his professional life and his personal life would collapse entirely. But tonight, lying in the dark, he allowed himself to acknowledge something he hadn't admitted to Chloe or his father or anyone else. This arrangement wasn't just about stopping his mother's matchmaking. It was about buying time to figure out what he actually wanted instead of defaulting to what everyone expected. It was about protecting Emma from a parade of temporary women who'd never last. It was about creating space to breathe in a life that had felt suffocating for far too long. And if that required deceiving everyone he knew for a year, well, he'd already committed to worse lies in the name of self-preservation. Mason closed his eyes and tried not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. The contract arrived by courier on Monday morning, 48 pages of legal terminology that reduced their arrangement to clauses and contingencies. Mason read through it twice before forwarding it to Chloe. his coffee going cold as he parsed the language his attorney had used to describe what they were attempting. Temporary spousal arrangement, performance-based compensation, mutual termination rights. The words made it sound clinical, businesslike, stripped of the human desperation that had brought them to this point. His phone rang before he'd finished his second cup. Chloe's voice carried a note of barely controlled panic. "There's a clause about romantic feelings," she said without preamble. "Section 7, subsection C. Did you read it?" Mason flipped to the page, scanning the text he'd glossed over earlier. His attorney had included a provision he hadn't explicitly requested, but which made a certain brutal sense. If either party developed genuine romantic feelings for the other, they were required to disclose immediately. Failure to disclose constituted breach of contract. Upon disclosure, the arrangement would terminate within 30 days, and all future financial obligations would cease except for the mother's medical care, which would continue for 6 months to allow for alternative arrangements. "I see it," Mason said slowly. "I didn't ask for that specifically, but I understand why it's there. It protects both of us from emotional complications." "It makes love a liability." Chloe's voice was tight. "We're literally signing a contract that says if we catch feelings, we lose everything." "Not everything. Your mother's care continues regardless, remember? That was non-negotiable." "For 6 months, and then what?" She exhaled sharply. "Mason, this clause basically says that developing real emotions is a breach of contract. That's insane." "It's protective," Mason countered, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "We're entering a situation where we'll be spending significant time together, performing intimacy for an audience. That kind of proximity can create false feelings. This clause ensures we stay honest with ourselves and each other. Or it ensures we bury anything real that might develop because we're too terrified of losing the arrangement." Chloe's laugh was bitter. "Your attorney is either brilliant or sadistic." "He's thorough. That's what I pay him for." Mason set down the contract and rubbed his temples. "Do you want me to have him remove it?" The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. When Chloe finally spoke, her voice had shifted to something more resigned. "No, leave it. You're right that we need safeguards. I just didn't expect them to feel so much like a trap. If it helps, I have just as much to lose as you do." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you could walk away tomorrow and your life would be exactly the same. My mother's care would end, my teaching salary wouldn't magically increase, and I'd be right back where I started." She paused. "We're not equally invested in this, Mason. Let's at least be honest about that." The assessment stung because it was accurate. Mason had resources and options. Chloe had desperation and limited choices. The power imbalance had been present from the beginning, but hearing her articulate it so clearly made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite name. "You're right," he admitted, "and I'm sorry. I should have been more careful about the contract terms." "It's fine. I'll sign it anyway." Chloe's voice softened slightly. "I'm meeting your mother for lunch in 2 hours, and I'm terrified. Any advice?" "Be yourself. She'll see through anything fake." "I'm about to spend a year being fake. That's kind of the whole point." "Be yourself when you're with her," Mason clarified. "Save the performance for public events. My mother values authenticity, even when she's being intrusive." "That's not reassuring." "She'll like you," Mason said with more confidence than he felt. "Just don't let her railroad you into anything you're not comfortable with. She has opinions about everything from wedding planning to child rearing, and she's not shy about sharing them." "Wedding planning?" Chloe's voice rose. "We're already married, remember? She'll want to throw a reception. She's already mentioned it to my father. Just be prepared." "I can't believe this is my life now." But there was a hint of humor underneath the exasperation. "Okay, I'm going to meet your terrifying mother and try not to expose our elaborate fraud within the first 5 minutes. Wish me luck." "You don't need luck. You're smart, kind, and good under pressure. You'll be fine." "You barely know me. How can you possibly know I'm good under pressure?" "You agreed to this arrangement, didn't you? That requires either exceptional courage or exceptional desperation, and I'm betting on courage." Another pause, this one different. "Thank you," Chloe said quietly. "I'll text you after lunch and let you know if I survived." Mason spent the next 2 hours in surgery, removing a damaged heart valve and replacing it with mechanical precision. The work required total focus, leaving no room for thoughts about fake marriages or contract clauses or the young woman currently having lunch with his mother. But as he closed the final suture and stepped back to let his team finish, his mind immediately returned to Chloe. He checked his phone in the scrub room and found 3 messages waiting. The first was from his mother, sent 30 minutes ago. "Chloe is delightful. We're having a wonderful time. You should have told me about her sooner." The second was from Chloe, sent 10 minutes later. "Your mother just ordered champagne to celebrate. I'm in way over my head." The third was from his father. "Your mother is planning a reception for 200 people. Thought you should know." Mason closed his eyes and counted to 10. Then he called Chloe. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and carefully modulated in a way that told him she was still with Eleanor. "Hi, sweetheart. We were just talking about you." The endearment hit him unexpectedly, even though he knew it was pure performance. "How's lunch going?" "Wonderfully. Your mother has been sharing the most interesting stories about your childhood. Did you really break your arm trying to skateboard off the garage roof?" "I was 12 and convinced I could fly." Didn't end well. Mason kept his voice light, playing along. "Listen, I just wanted to check that everything's okay. My mom can be intense." "She's been lovely," Chloe said, and Mason heard the truth underneath the diplomatic phrasing. His mother had been intense, but Chloe was handling it. "We're actually just finishing up. I should let you get back to work." "Okay. Text me later?" "I will. Love you." The words came out smoothly, naturally, as if she'd been saying them for months instead of performing them for the first time. "Love you too," Mason replied automatically, and felt something uncomfortable shift in his chest at how easily the lie left his lips. He ended the call and stood in the empty scrub room, staring at his reflection in the mirror above the sink. This was going to be harder than he'd anticipated. Not the lying itself, which seemed to come disturbingly easily, but the weight of maintaining the fiction across every interaction, every conversation, every moment that required them to be anything other than what they actually were, strangers bound by a contract and mutual need. His phone buzzed with a new message from Chloe, this one clearly sent after she'd left the restaurant. "Survived. Barely. Your mother wants us to come to dinner Sunday night with Emma. I told her I'd check with you first." Mason's stomach clenched. He'd been dreading this conversation since Saturday night. Emma was the one part of his life he'd wanted to keep separate from this arrangement, protected from the inevitable complications and eventual dissolution. But his mother was right that it would seem strange if his new wife never met his daughter. He called Chloe back, catching her as she was getting into her car. "Sunday dinner," he said. "That's sooner than I'd hoped." "I know, I tried to deflect, but your mother was very persuasive." Chloe's voice was tight. "Mason, I meant what I said about keeping Emma separate. If you're not comfortable with this, just say so. I'll handle your mother." "It's not about comfort. It's about Emma's well-being. She's 4 years old, and she's already been through one parent walking away. I don't want her getting attached to someone who's going to disappear in a year." "Then we keep it casual. I'm Daddy's friend who comes to dinner sometimes. Kids that age don't need the whole relationship explained. We can keep it simple until you figure out how you want to handle it long term." The suggestion made sense, but it also required Emma to exist in yet another carefully managed fiction. Mason hated the idea of lying to his daughter, even by omission. "Let me think about it," he said finally. "I'll talk to my parents and figure out the best approach." "Okay, and Mason? Your mother asked me about our wedding. I told her it was just the two of us at the courthouse, very simple and private. I hope that aligns with whatever you told her." "That's perfect. She'll be disappointed we didn't have a ceremony, but it explains why there are no photos or witnesses." Mason paused. "How was she otherwise? Did she interrogate you?" "She asked approximately 7,000 questions about my background, my family, my job, my intentions toward you, and whether I wanted children. I deflected most of them politely and answered the rest as vaguely as possible." Chloe's laugh was strained. "She also mentioned that she's planning a reception to properly introduce me to the family and your colleagues. Apparently 200 people is intimate in your mother's world." "That sounds about right." Mason felt a headache building behind his eyes. "I'll talk to her about scaling it back." "Don't bother. I get the feeling that once your mother decides something, it happens whether you want it to or not." "You're learning fast." "I'm a quick study." There was a pause, then Chloe's voice dropped to something more serious. "Mason, are you sure about this? Because once we walk into that reception with 200 witnesses, there's no going back. This stops being a small lie we can quietly undo and becomes a major deception that will hurt people when it ends. I know. Mason looked out the window at the city stretching below the hospital, thousands of people living their complicated, messy lives. But I'm already in too deep to back out now. My mother believes we're married. She's planning a party. She's probably already told half her social circle. If we confess now, it'll be worse than if we'd never lied in the first place. So we're committed. We're committed. The words felt like a binding spell, sealing them both into a course of action that had already begun to take on a life of its own. After they hung up, Mason sat in his office and tried to focus on patient charts, but his mind kept drifting to Sunday dinner and the impossible task of introducing Chloe to Emma without creating exactly the kind of attachment he was trying to avoid. He was still wrestling with the problem when his father called. "Your mother is in full wedding planner mode," Richard said without preamble. "She's contacted the Meridian Hotel about booking their ballroom for the reception. She's consulting with caterers. She's making lists of potential guests and cross-referencing them with people who attended the Henderson wedding to figure out who already knows about your marriage announcement." "How bad is it?" "She's created a spreadsheet, Mason, an actual Excel spreadsheet with color coding." Richard's dry humor couldn't quite mask his concern. "I tried to suggest she might be moving too fast, but you know your mother. Once she has a project, she's unstoppable. I'll talk to her." "Will you? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been remarkably passive about this entire situation. You made the announcement, you introduced Chloe to Eleanor, and now you're just letting things happen instead of managing them." The criticism stung because it was accurate. Mason had been reactive rather than proactive, responding to his mother's enthusiasm instead of steering it towards something manageable. "You're right," he admitted. "I'll get it under control." "See that you do." "And Mason, I like Chloe. I only spoke with her briefly when she and Eleanor stopped by the house after lunch, but she seems genuine, smart, grounded, kind. Whatever arrangement you two have made, don't let it turn her into collateral damage when this falls apart." The warning echoed his father's earlier advice about guarding his own heart, but this time the concern was focused outward. Richard was worried about Chloe, about what would happen to her when the performance ended and the curtain came down. "I won't," Mason promised. "The contract protects her financially, and I'll make sure she's not hurt by the fallout." Financial protection isn't the same as emotional protection. Richard's voice was gentle but firm. "That girl is walking into our family's circus with a brave face and probably more fear than she's showing. Be careful with her." After his father hung up, Mason sat in the quiet of his office and thought about Chloe sitting across from his mother at lunch, answering invasive questions with polite deflection, performing the role of devoted wife while internally calculating how long she could maintain the facade. She'd signed up for this, yes, but that didn't mean he had the right to be careless with what he was asking of her. He pulled up the contract on his computer and read through Section 7 again, the clause about romantic feelings. His attorney had structured it as a protective measure, a way to prevent emotional complications from derailing the arrangement. But Chloe was right that it turned genuine connection into a liability, something to be confessed and purged rather than acknowledged and navigated. The more Mason thought about it, the more uncomfortable he became. They were essentially creating a situation where honesty about feelings would trigger consequences, which meant the rational response would be to hide those feelings for as long as possible. That wasn't protection. That was a recipe for disaster. He called his attorney. "I need you to revise Section 7, Mason said. "The romantic feelings clause. I want it changed." "To what?" His attorney sounded wary. "That clause protects both parties from emotional entanglement that could complicate the arrangement. It also creates an incentive to lie about genuine feelings. I want it restructured so that developing feelings isn't automatically a breach of contract. Instead, both parties agree to discuss any emotional changes honestly, and if both agree the situation has become untenable, they can mutually terminate. But the decision to end the arrangement should be joint, not automatic. That's significantly riskier for both of you." "I know, but the current version is worse. Send me the revision by tomorrow." After he ended the call, Mason texted Chloe. "I'm having the romantic feelings clause revised. It was too rigid. New version will require mutual agreement to terminate rather than automatic cancellation." Her response came quickly. Why? Because the current version incentivizes dishonesty. If we're going to make this work, we need to be able to talk openly about what's happening, even when it's uncomfortable. Three dots appeared and disappeared several times before her message came through. Thank you. That was bothering me more than I wanted to admit. Me too. Does this mean we trust each other now? Mason smiled at his phone. Let's say we're working on it. Fair enough. I'm meeting Rachel for dinner tonight. She wants details about the arrangement and permission to hate you if you hurt me. Tell her I welcome her scrutiny. We're still on for Friday? Yes, 7 o'clock at Rossetti's. She picked the restaurant specifically because it's loud and public, which apparently makes it harder for you to murder me and hide the body. Your friend has a dark imagination. She watches a lot of true crime documentaries. Mason found himself grinning despite the seriousness of their situation. Chloe's humor emerged in unexpected moments, cutting through the tension with something approaching genuine warmth. He caught himself looking forward to Friday dinner, to meeting the friend who knew the truth, to having a conversation that didn't require constant performance. Then he remembered that Friday dinner was itself a kind of performance, proving to Rachel that he was trustworthy, that Chloe had made a smart decision, that this arrangement was something other than a disaster waiting to happen. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. Sunday dinner at 6. I'm making Emma's favorite, macaroni and cheese with the good breadcrumbs. Chloe seems lovely, Mason. I'm so happy for you. The message was warm and genuine, filled with the kind of maternal affection that made lying to her feel exponentially worse. Mason set down his phone and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, feeling the full weight of what he'd created. He'd built a house of cards tall enough to shelter him from his mother's matchmaking, but with every passing hour, more cards were added to the structure. The reception Eleanor was planning, the dinner with Emma, the meeting with Rachel. Each new element made the construction more elaborate and more fragile, until Mason could barely remember what the foundation looked like anymore. Wednesday came faster than Mason anticipated. He spent the morning in back-to-back surgeries, his hands steady even as his mind drifted to the lunch meeting with Chloe. They'd agreed to meet at his office first, review the revised contract together, then grab food at the cafe across from the hospital. It would be their first truly private conversation since the coffee shop, the first time they'd interact as themselves rather than as the characters they were playing for everyone else. Chloe arrived exactly on time, dressed in dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger than she had at the wedding, less polished, but somehow more real. Mason stood when she entered, suddenly aware that his office felt too intimate for this conversation, desk covered in patient files, walls lined with diplomas and family photos, the picture of Emma prominent on his credenza. Nice office, Chloe said, her eyes scanning the space. Very Dr. Chic. Is that a compliment or an observation? A bit of both. She picked up the photo of Emma, studying it with an expression Mason couldn't quite read. She's beautiful. She has your eyes. And her mother's smile, unfortunately. The words came out more bitter than Mason intended. Chloe set down the photo carefully. You don't talk about your ex-wife much. There's not much to say. We got married too young, had Emma too soon, and fell apart under the pressure. Natalie's a brilliant surgeon and a terrible mother, and she had the self-awareness to recognize she couldn't do both. Mason moved around his desk, creating distance. She lives in Los Angeles now, sends birthday cards, and makes video calls when she remembers. That must be hard for Emma. Emma doesn't know any different. As far as she's concerned, Mommy is someone who lives far away and occasionally appears on the computer screen. It's sad, but it's stable. Mason gestured toward the chairs in front of his desk. We should probably look at the contract. They spent the next 40 minutes reviewing the revised language, Chloe asking sharp questions that made it clear she'd read every word carefully. The romantic feelings clause had been restructured exactly as Mason requested. Development of genuine emotions was no longer an automatic breach, but rather a situation requiring honest discussion and mutual decision-making. If both parties agreed that emotional entanglement made the arrangement untenable, they could terminate jointly. If one party wanted to end it and the other didn't, they'd enter a mandatory 30-day discussion period before any final decision. This is better, Chloe said, setting down the document. Still complicated, but better. Complicated is unavoidable at this point. Mason signed his copy and slid hers across the desk. But at least we won't be penalized for being honest with each other. Chloe signed her name in neat, precise script, and just like that, they were legally bound to their elaborate fiction. Mason took both copies and filed them in his desk drawer, feeling the finality of it settle over the room. "We should eat," he said. "I have surgery in 2 hours." The cafe across the street was crowded with hospital staff on lunch break, but they found a quiet corner table near the window. Mason ordered a sandwich he wasn't hungry for, and Chloe got soup she barely touched. They sat in awkward silence for several minutes before Chloe finally broke it. "I moved my mother to Evergreen Hills yesterday," she said quietly. "The director gave me a tour, showed me her room, explained all the programs they offer. It's exactly what she needs, Mason. I can't thank you enough." "You don't have to thank me. That's part of our arrangement." "I know, but still." Chloe stirred her soup without eating it. "I visited her this morning before coming here. She was in a music therapy session, and for about 10 minutes, she seemed almost like herself. She smiled at me, recognized me, asked about my day. Then the moment passed and she was confused again, asking where my father was." Her voice cracked slightly. "He died 8 years ago." Mason didn't say anything, just waited, giving her space to continue or stop as she needed. "I know the disease will keep progressing," Chloe continued. "I know Evergreen Hills can't stop it or reverse it, but at least now she's comfortable. At least she's getting the best possible care in whatever time she has left." She finally looked up at Mason, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "So thank you. Even if this arrangement is crazy and complicated and possibly a huge mistake, thank you for giving my mother that gift." "You're welcome," Mason said simply, because there was nothing else adequate to say. They finished lunch in more comfortable silence, the earlier awkwardness replaced by something approaching companionship. As they walked back toward the hospital, Chloe bumped his shoulder lightly with hers. "So Friday night, Rachel's going to grill you about everything, your intentions, your background, your credit score, possibly your blood type. Are you prepared?" "I've faced down hospital boards and hostile surgical colleagues. I think I can handle one protective best friend." "Rachel is different. She's got this way of looking at people that makes them confess things they didn't mean to share." Chloe grinned. "Fair warning, she already thinks you're either using me or running some kind of elaborate con." "And what do you think?" Chloe considered the question seriously. "I think you're a man who made an impulsive decision and is now trying to manage the consequences as ethically as possible. I think you genuinely want to help my mother, not because you're noble, but because it makes you feel less guilty about the situation you've created. And I think you're just as scared as I am about how this is all going to play out." The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Mason found himself nodding. "You're not wrong. I'm rarely wrong about people. It's my superpower." She stopped at the hospital entrance. "I should go. I've got lesson plans to finish and a classroom to prepare. Third graders are starting their unit on ecosystems tomorrow, and I need to make sure I have enough plastic animals to simulate a food chain." "Sounds educational." "It's educational chaos, which is basically my job description." Chloe hesitated, then stepped closer and went up on her toes to kiss his cheek quickly. The gesture was so sudden and unexpected that Mason froze, his brain short-circuiting at the brief contact. Chloe stepped back, her expression flustered. "Sorry, I saw someone from the hospital board walking past, and I thought we should look convincing. Was that okay?" "That was fine," Mason managed, his cheeks still warm where her lips had been. "Good instincts." "Survival instincts," Chloe corrected. "See you Friday?" "Friday," Mason confirmed and watched her walk away, his hand unconsciously rising to touch the spot she'd kissed. He stood there for a moment, medical staff flowing around him, trying to reconcile the contradiction of what had just happened. It was performance, pure performance, triggered by Chloe spotting someone who knew Mason. But it had felt startlingly real in the moment. The warmth of her lips, the brief contact of her hand on his arm for balance, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered for a second after she pulled away. Mason shook his head and headed back inside, reminding himself sternly that physical proximity was inevitable in their situation. They'd need to be comfortable with casual touch, with displays of affection that looked natural to observers. That kiss had been strategic, nothing more. But as he scrubbed in for his afternoon surgery, He caught himself thinking about Friday dinner with a mixture of anticipation and something that felt dangerously close to genuine interest in spending time with Chloe Bennett outside the bounds of their contractual obligations. He pushed the thought away and focused on the patient waiting in the operating room, compartmentalizing the way he'd learned to do throughout medical school and surgical training. Work in one box, Emma in another. The arrangement with Chloe in a third, carefully sealed container that he'd open only when absolutely necessary. But the containers were starting to leak, boundaries blurring in ways Mason hadn't anticipated. And Friday night, sitting across from Chloe and her suspicious best friend, those boundaries would be tested in ways he wasn't sure he was prepared for. Friday evening arrived with the kind of inevitability that made Mason check his watch every 15 minutes. He'd changed clothes 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a charcoal sweater, then second-guessed the choice while driving to Rossetti's. The restaurant was exactly as Chloe had described, crowded, noisy, the kind of place where private conversations required leaning close across the table. He spotted Chloe immediately, sitting at a corner booth with a woman who could only be Rachel. Rachel Chen was petite with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she was already evaluating Mason from across the room. She wore a leather jacket over a vintage band t-shirt, her dark hair cut in a precise bob that framed her face. When Mason approached the table, she didn't stand or smile, just watched him with the intensity of someone conducting a field investigation. "Mason, this is Rachel," Chloe said, her voice carrying a nervous edge. "Rachel, this is Mason." "The fake husband," Rachel said flatly. "Nice to finally meet the man who convinced my best friend to participate in an elaborate deception for money." Mason slid into the booth across from them, meeting Rachel's challenging stare without flinching. That's an accurate if unflattering summary, though in my defense, Chloe had the opportunity to say no at multiple points. "And yet here we are," Rachel leaned back, arms crossed. "So let's establish some ground rules, Dr. Hale. I'm the only person besides you two who knows this marriage is fake, which means I'm also the only person who can call you out if you hurt her. Are we clear?" "Perfectly clear." Mason kept his voice level. "And for what it's worth, I have no intention of hurting Chloe. The contract we signed protects her financially and legally, and I've already arranged for her mother's care at Evergreen Hills." "Money isn't the only way to hurt someone," Rachel shot back. "You're asking her to lie to everyone she knows, to perform intimacy with a stranger, to walk into your complicated family and pretend she belongs there. That's a lot of emotional labor for a year-long arrangement that ends with her being discarded when you don't need her anymore." The accusation hit harder than Mason expected, maybe because Rachel was articulating fears he'd been trying not to examine too closely. Before he could respond, Chloe intervened. "Rach, we talked about this. I made this choice with full knowledge of what I was getting into. Mason has been nothing but straightforward about the terms and expectations." "Straightforward about using you as a human shield against his mother's matchmaking," Rachel corrected. "Forgive me if I'm not throwing him a parade for basic decency." A waiter appeared, mercifully interrupting the interrogation to take drink orders. Mason ordered whiskey, Chloe got wine, and Rachel requested a beer with the kind of precision that suggested she was going to need alcohol to get through this dinner. After the waiter left, Rachel turned her attention back to Mason. "Tell me about your ex-wife," she said, "because from what Chloe's told me, you've got some baggage in the failed marriage department." "That's a hell of an opening question," Mason said. "I don't believe in easing into things." Rachel's smile was sharp. "So? What happened with wife number 1 that makes you think fake wife number 2 is a better solution than actual therapy?" Mason took a breath, reminding himself that Rachel's hostility came from a place of fierce loyalty to Chloe. "My first marriage failed because we got together for the wrong reasons and stayed together out of obligation. We had chemistry but no foundation, passion but no partnership. When Emma was born, the cracks became canyons. Natalie wanted her career more than she wanted motherhood, and I wanted a family more than I wanted to admit my marriage was failing. We made each other miserable for 2 years before she finally left. And now you're entering another fake marriage instead of dealing with the actual issue, which is that you don't know how to set boundaries with your mother." Rachel's assessment was brutal in its accuracy. "You're not wrong," Mason admitted. "This arrangement is absolutely a way to avoid dealing with my mother's expectations head-on. But it's also buying me time to figure out what I actually want instead of defaulting to what everyone else thinks I should want. And it's helping Chloe's mother get the care she needs." So yes, it's unconventional and messy, and probably a terrible idea, but it serves a purpose for both of us. Rachel studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The waiter returned with their drinks, and she took a long pull from her beer before speaking again. Fine, I'll accept that you're not a complete monster, but I have conditions. Of course you do, Mason said dryly. First, you hurt Chloe emotionally, physically, or financially, and I will make your life a living hell. I have connections in the press, and I'm not afraid to use them. Noted. Second, if this arrangement starts feeling wrong to Chloe, you let her walk away immediately. No guilt trips, no financial manipulation, no making her feel obligated to stay. Already agreed to that in the contract. Third, Rachel's voice dropped to something more serious. If you start developing real feelings for her, you tell her immediately. Don't let this turn into some romantic comedy where you realize you're in love but keep it secret because of the stupid contract clause. That kind of thing might work in movies, but in real life it just creates a mess. Mason thought about the revised contract, the clause that now required honest discussion rather than automatic termination. I can agree to that, though the same should apply to Chloe. If she develops feelings, I need to know. She won't, Rachel said with confidence. Chloe is practical. She sees this for what it is, a business arrangement with emotional theater attached. She's not going to confuse performance with reality. Chloe had been quiet through most of this exchange, but now she spoke up. I'm sitting right here, Rach. You don't need to speak for me. Someone needs to make sure you don't get steamrolled by Dr. Perfect over here with his money and his promises and his tragic backstory. Rachel gestured at Mason with her beer bottle. You have a habit of seeing the best in people even when they don't deserve it. And you have a habit of assuming the worst, Chloe countered. Mason has done everything he said he would. My mom is at Evergreen Hills getting better care than I ever could have provided. I have a contract that protects me legally. We've established ground rules and check-ins. What more do you want from him? I want him to be worthy of your trust, Rachel said quietly. Because you're giving him a lot of it. And trust is the one thing that can't be put in a contract. The observation settled over the table like fog, thick and uncomfortable. Mason found himself looking at Chloe, really looking at her, seeing the vulnerability she usually kept hidden behind competence and careful planning. Rachel was right that Chloe was extending trust beyond what their arrangement strictly required, showing up to family dinners and hospital functions, and performing a role that required her to be emotionally exposed in ways that went far beyond signing paperwork. You're right, Mason said, addressing Rachel but keeping his eyes on Chloe. Trust isn't something I can contractually guarantee. All I can offer is my word that I'll do everything possible to make sure Chloe doesn't regret this arrangement. And if I fail at that, then you'll have every right to make my life hell. Rachel seemed mollified by this, or at least willing to move past her interrogation. Okay, then let's eat, and you can tell me all about this reception your mother is planning that apparently involves ice sculptures and a string quartet. The rest of dinner passed in easier conversation. Rachel grilled Mason about his work, his daughter, his taste in movies and music, building a comprehensive profile of the man Chloe had tied herself to for the next year. Mason found himself enjoying the challenge of Rachel's questions, appreciating her refusal to let him hide behind charm or professional credentials. By the time dessert arrived, Rachel had relaxed enough to actually smile at something Mason said about Emma's obsession with dinosaurs. You're better than I expected, Rachel admitted, as they waited for the check. Still not sure this whole thing isn't going to blow up spectacularly, but at least you seem like a decent human being underneath the fake marriage scheme. That's the warmest endorsement I've received all week, Mason said. Don't let it go to your head. Rachel stood and grabbed her jacket. I'm going to the restroom and giving you two exactly 3 minutes of privacy. Use it wisely. As soon as Rachel was out of earshot, Chloe leaned across the table. I'm so sorry. She can be a lot. She's protective. I respect that. Mason reached across the table and took Chloe's hand, the gesture feeling both calculated and genuine at the same time. She's right that you're trusting me with things that can't be written into contracts. I don't take that lightly. Chloe's fingers tightened around his. I know you don't. Rachel sees the worst-case scenarios because she's watched me get hurt before. But I'm not walking into this blind, Mason. I know exactly what we're doing and why. Do you? The The question came out more seriously than Mason intended. Because sometimes I'm not sure I know anymore. This started as a simple solution to a simple problem, and now my mother is planning a reception, we're having dinner with my daughter on Sunday, and we're sitting here holding hands because it feels like what we should be doing, rather than because someone's watching. Chloe's eyes widened slightly. Are you having second thoughts? No. Maybe. I don't know. Mason rubbed his thumb across her knuckles, a gesture that felt far too intimate for their arrangement. I just want to make sure we're still on the same page about what this is and what it isn't. We're on the same page, Chloe said firmly. This is a temporary arrangement designed to help both of us get what we need. You need space from your mother's matchmaking. I need my mother's care covered. The fact that we're starting to get comfortable with each other is good. It makes the performance more convincing, but it doesn't change the fundamental nature of what we're doing. Right, the fundamental nature. Mason released her hand as Rachel returned to the table. Just checking. The drive home was quiet, Mason's mind replaying the evening in fragments. Rachel's hostility softening into grudging acceptance. Chloe's hand warm in his across the table. The moment when performance had blurred into something that felt uncomfortably real. He pulled into his driveway and sat in the dark car, staring at his empty house and wondering what the hell he was doing. His phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. Thank you for surviving Rachel's interrogation. She texted me after you left and said, and I quote, he's either genuine or a really good liar, still deciding which. Mason smiled and typed back. What do you think? I think you're both. Genuine about wanting to help, good at lying when necessary. It's an interesting combination. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. Like Rachel said, I see the best in people. And what's the best you see in me? The three dots appeared and disappeared several times before Chloe's response came through. Someone who loves his daughter fiercely and is trying to protect her from getting hurt. Someone who keeps his promises even when they're inconvenient. Someone who's more scared of this arrangement than he wants to admit, but is too stubborn to back out. Mason stared at the message, feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the performance they'd been maintaining all evening. Chloe saw through him with uncomfortable clarity, reading the fears he tried to keep hidden behind competence and careful planning. You're disconcertingly perceptive, he finally typed. I'm a teacher. Reading people is part of the job description. Get some sleep, Mason. Sunday's going to be hard enough without you being exhausted. Good night, Chloe. Good night. Mason sat in his car for another 10 minutes before going inside, Chloe's assessment of his character replaying in his mind. Someone who's more scared of this arrangement than he wants to admit. She was right, of course. He was terrified. Not of the lying or the performance or even his mother's inevitable disappointment when it all fell apart. He was terrified of the moments when the line between fiction and reality became impossible to find. When holding Chloe's hand felt natural instead of strategic. When he caught himself looking forward to seeing her for reasons that had nothing to do with their contract. Sunday arrived too quickly, bringing with it a level of anxiety Mason usually reserved for complicated surgeries. He picked Emma up from his parents' house mid-morning, deflecting his mother's questions about Chloe while Emma chattered about her weekend activities. In the car, he tried to figure out how to explain who would be at dinner without lying to his daughter, more than absolutely necessary. Em, remember how Daddy told you he has a friend named Chloe? Mason kept his voice casual as he navigated traffic. The one from the wedding? Emma kicked her feet against the car seat, her stuffed rabbit clutched in both hands. Grandma said she's your special friend. That's right, she's going to be at dinner tonight. I wanted you to know so you're not surprised. Is she nice? She's very nice. She's a teacher like your Miss Sarah, but she teaches older kids. Does she like dinosaurs? This was Emma's primary criterion for evaluating new people. I don't know. You'll have to ask her. Mason glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, her face serious as she considered this new information. You don't have to do anything special, sweetheart. Just be yourself. Okay. Emma went back to making her rabbit dance across her lap, apparently satisfied with the explanation. Mason spent the rest of the drive trying to remember when his life had become so complicated that he needed to rehearse conversations with his 4-year-old daughter. He'd always prided himself on honesty with Emma, on creating a relationship built on trust and open communication. Now he was introducing her to his fake wife and hoping she wouldn't ask too many questions that required elaborately constructed answers. His parents' house was warm and bright when they arrived that evening, the smell of Eleanor's cooking filling the air. Emma ran ahead to find her grandmother, leaving Mason to steel himself for what promised to be an exhausting performance. Chloe arrived 15 minutes later, and Mason met her at the door before his mother could intercept. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "Absolutely not," Chloe admitted, "but I'm here anyway." She dressed carefully for the occasion, a simple navy dress that was formal enough to show respect, but casual enough not to seem like she was trying too hard. Her hair was down, and she wore minimal makeup, looking young and slightly nervous in a way that made Mason want to reassure her that everything would be fine, even though he had no idea if that was true. "Mason, is that Chloe?" Eleanor appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face bright with anticipation. Come in, come in. We're so glad you could make it." "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Hale." Chloe stepped inside, and Eleanor pulled her into an embrace that lasted several seconds too long. "Please, call me Eleanor. We're family now." She released Chloe and stepped back to evaluate her with the practiced eye of someone used to cataloging first impressions. "Mason, why don't you introduce Chloe to Emma? She's in the living room with Richard." Mason placed his hand on the small of Chloe's back, a gesture that was becoming automatic, and guided her toward the living room. Emma was building an elaborate tower out of blocks, while Richard watched from the sofa, offering occasional architectural advice. When they entered, Emma looked up with the wide-eyed curiosity of a child meeting someone new. "Em, this is my friend Chloe," Mason said, crouching down to his daughter's level. "Chloe, this is Emma." "Hi, Emma." Chloe knelt beside the block tower, her voice gentle. "That's a really impressive building. Are you an architect?" "I'm 4, Emma said seriously. "But I know a lot about building things. Grandpa taught me." "That's excellent. I like the way you put the blue blocks at the corners for support. That's very smart engineering." Emma's face lit up at the praise. "Do you want to help?" "I'd love to." Chloe settled onto the floor in her nice dress without hesitation, and Mason felt something shift in his chest as he watched her carefully place blocks according to Emma's detailed instructions. Richard caught Mason's eye and raised an eyebrow, a silent question that Mason couldn't quite interpret. He joined his father on the sofa while Chloe and Emma constructed increasingly elaborate architectural projects, their heads bent close together in concentration. "She's good with children," Richard observed quietly. "She's a teacher. It's literally her job. Doesn't mean she'd be good in an unstructured setting with a child she's never met. But look at her. She's following Emma's lead, asking questions, building rapport without trying too hard." Richard paused. "She's the real deal, Mason. Whatever arrangement you two have, she's in it with genuine intent." "I know." Mason watched Chloe laugh at something Emma said, her smile unguarded and warm. "That's what worries me." Dinner was both better and worse than Mason had anticipated. Better because Chloe navigated Eleanor's questions with grace and humor, deflecting the invasive ones while answering the innocent ones with enough detail to seem forthcoming. Worse because Emma took to Chloe immediately, insisting she sit next to her at dinner and peppering her with questions about teaching and favorite animals and whether she'd ever seen a real dinosaur fossil. "Miss Chloe knows everything," Emma declared halfway through the main course, and Mason saw his mother's expression soften with approval. "It's just Chloe, sweetheart," Chloe corrected gently. "And I definitely don't know everything. I still have to look up words in the dictionary sometimes." "What words?" Emma demanded. "Well, just yesterday I had to look up perspicacious because one of my students asked what it meant." "What does it mean?" "It means having a ready insight into things, being able to understand things quickly and accurately." Emma tested the word on her tongue. "Perspicacious. That's hard to say." "It is. Want me to teach you an easier word that means almost the same thing?" They spent the rest of dinner playing a vocabulary game that had Emma giggling and Eleanor beaming with approval. Mason sat back and watched Chloe work her magic, drawing his daughter out with the same gentle competence she'd probably used on countless third graders. It was exactly what he'd hoped wouldn't happen. Emma was getting attached, forming a connection with someone who would disappear from her life in less than a year. After dinner, while Eleanor and Richard cleaned up despite Chloe's offers to help, Mason found himself alone with Chloe in the living room. Emma had crashed on the sofa, worn out from the excitement, her head pillowed on Chloe's lap while Chloe absently stroked her hair. "You didn't have to be that good with her," Mason said quietly. Chloe looked up, confused. "What?" "Emma, you didn't have to win her over so completely. We agreed to keep her separate from this arrangement." "I was being myself," Chloe said, her voice defensive. "You told me to be myself with your family, remember? I like kids. I'm good with kids. I wasn't going to ignore your daughter or treat her like she wasn't important just to maintain some artificial distance." "I know, Mason ran his hand through his hair, frustration building. "She's already asking when she can see you again. My mother is probably in the kitchen planning play dates. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before introducing your fake wife to your daughter," Chloe shot back, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Emma. "You can't have it both ways, Mason. Either I'm part of your life or I'm not. Either we sell this to your family or we don't. But you don't get to be upset with me for doing exactly what you asked me to do." The truth of it stung. Mason opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, recognizing that Chloe was right. He'd created an impossible situation and was now angry at her for navigating it successfully. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "You're right. I'm taking out my frustration on you when the real issue is that this whole situation is more complicated than I thought it would be. Everything about this is more complicated than either of us thought." Chloe's voice softened. "But we're in it now, and we need to make it work. That means I'm going to have a relationship with Emma, because pretending she doesn't exist would be cruel and obviously fake. We'll keep it appropriate. I'm Daddy's friend, someone who comes around sometimes, not a replacement mother. But I'm not going to be cold to a 4-year-old just because you're scared of what happens when this ends." Emma stirred, making a small sound in her sleep, and Chloe adjusted her position to make the child more comfortable. The gesture was so natural, so maternal, that Mason felt his throat tighten. "She doesn't usually warm up to people this fast," he said. "Kids can tell when you actually like them versus when you're just tolerating them. I genuinely enjoyed dinner with Emma. She's smart and funny and creative. You should be proud." "I am proud. She's the best thing I've ever done." Mason sat down on the sofa next to them, careful not to jostle Emma. "Her mother didn't want her. Did I tell you that?" "No." "Natalie got pregnant by accident. We'd been married 6 months, and she'd just been offered a position in a prestigious surgical program. She wanted an abortion, and I talked her out of it, promised I'd do all the heavy lifting with childcare, that her career wouldn't suffer." Mason's voice was flat with the memory. "It was selfish. I wanted a child, and I convinced her to have one, even though she didn't. We both paid for that decision, but Emma paid the most." "Emma seems happy and well-adjusted," Chloe said quietly. "Whatever happened with her mother, you've done a good job making her feel loved and secure." "I've tried, but I'm one person, and sometimes I wonder if I'm enough." "You're enough." Chloe's voice was firm. "And you don't need a wife to complete your family, fake or otherwise. You and Emma are already a complete family." The words settled over Mason like a warm blanket, offering comfort he didn't know he needed. He looked at Chloe sitting on his parents' sofa with his sleeping daughter in her lap, offering reassurance about his adequacy as a parent, and felt the careful boundaries he'd constructed around this arrangement start to blur in dangerous ways. Before he could examine that feeling too closely, Eleanor appeared in the doorway. "Oh, how sweet," she said softly, taking in the scene. "Emma's completely worn out. You know, she asked me earlier if Chloe was going to be her new mommy." Mason's stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" "I said that was something she'd have to discuss with you and Chloe when she's ready to understand." Eleanor's smile was knowing. "But between us adults, I'm thrilled that Emma is connecting with Chloe. It's exactly what this family needs." Chloe carefully shifted Emma's weight and stood, lifting the child with practiced ease. "Where should I put her down?" "There's a guest room upstairs, second door on the left," Eleanor said. "Mason can show you." Mason led Chloe upstairs, opening the door to the room that had been his childhood bedroom and now served as Emma's space when she stayed at her grandparents' house. Chloe laid Emma down on the bed with the kind of gentle competence that suggested she'd put children to sleep before, tucking the covers around her and placing the stuffed rabbit within easy reach. They stood together in the doorway for a moment, watching Emma sleep, and Mason felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing against his chest. He wanted to thank Chloe for being so good with Emma. He wanted to apologize for his earlier frustration. He wanted to tell her that watching her with his daughter had triggered something in him that felt dangerous and complicated and nothing like what their contract was supposed to contain. Instead, he just said, "We should go back downstairs before my mother starts planning our second wedding." Chloe laughed quietly. Too late. She cornered me in the bathroom earlier and asked if I'd consider a small ceremony so Emma could be a flower girl. What did you say? I said I'd think about it, which is my polite way of saying absolutely not, but I didn't want to offend her. They made their way back to the living room where Richard and Eleanor were having coffee. The rest of the evening passed in easier conversation, Eleanor sharing embarrassing stories from Mason's childhood, while Richard interjected with dry commentary that made Chloe laugh. By the time they said their goodbyes, Eleanor had extracted promises for future dinners and a commitment to attend the hospital gala next month. Mason walked Chloe to her car, the night air cool against his skin. She unlocked her door but didn't get in immediately, instead turning to face him. "That went better than I expected," she said. "Better or worse, depending on how you measure success. Emma loves you, my mother loves you, and we're now committed to a hospital gala where everyone we know will be watching us pretend to be in love. Is that going to be a problem?" Mason thought about it. The gala, the performance, the increasing difficulty of distinguishing between what was real and what was staged. "I don't know. Ask me after the gala." "Fair enough." Chloe hesitated, then stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him in a brief hug. "Thank you for tonight. Your family is lovely, and Emma is wonderful. Whatever else happens with this arrangement, I'm glad I got to meet them." Mason's arms came up automatically, returning the embrace, and for a moment they just stood there in his parents' driveway, holding each other for no audience except the stars. When Chloe pulled away, her eyes were bright with something Mason couldn't name. "See you at the gala?" she said. "See you at the gala," Mason confirmed, and watched her drive away with the uncomfortable knowledge that the lines he'd drawn around this arrangement were becoming increasingly fictional. He went back inside to collect Emma and found his mother waiting for him in the kitchen. "She's perfect for you," Eleanor said without preamble. "Smart, kind, wonderful with Emma. I'm so glad you found her." "Mom, I know you wanted to keep it private, and I understand why. But Mason, you deserve to be happy. You've been alone for so long, focusing on Emma and work and never thinking about yourself. Chloe makes you smile in a way I haven't seen since before your divorce." The words were meant kindly, but they landed like stones in Mason's chest. His mother saw what she wanted to see: a son who'd finally found love, a daughter-in-law who completed their family, a future that looked warm and stable and real. She had no idea she was building dreams on quicksand. "I'm glad you like her," Mason said carefully. "I more than like her. I love her already." Eleanor pulled him into a hug. "Hold on to this one, Mason. Don't let your fear of getting hurt again push away someone genuine." Mason drove home with Emma sleeping in the back seat, his mother's words echoing in his mind. Don't push away someone genuine. The advice was sound, except that his entire relationship with Chloe was built on deception. There was nothing genuine about it except the moments when he forgot they were pretending, when holding her hand or watching her with Emma felt like something real instead of something performed. Those were the moments that scared him most, not because they were fake, but because they were starting to feel authentic. And somewhere in the contract they'd signed, in the carefully worded clauses about emotional entanglement and required disclosure, was a trap that Mason was beginning to understand too late. They'd created rules to protect themselves from developing feelings, but feelings didn't follow rules. They emerged in quiet moments and gentle gestures and the sound of Chloe's laugh when Emma said something precocious. Mason carried his daughter inside and tucked her into bed, then stood in his study staring at the drawer where he'd filed their contract. The document that was supposed to make everything clear and controllable suddenly felt like a ticking bomb, counting down to the moment when someone would have to confess that the lines between performance and reality had become impossible to find. He just hoped that when that moment came, they'd both have the courage to face what they'd created together. The hospital gala arrived 3 weeks later, And with it came the kind of scrutiny Mason had been dreading since this entire arrangement began. The event was black tie formal, held in the same Meridian Hotel ballroom where he'd first met Chloe, and everyone who mattered in Chicago's medical community would be there. Mason stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his bow tie for the third time, trying to calm the anxiety thrumming through his veins. His phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Running 10 minutes late. Hair emergency. Don't leave without me." "I'll be here," he typed back, then added, "How bad is the hair emergency?" On a scale of 1 to 10, solid 7. Rachel is attempting damage control with a curling iron in prayer. Mason smiled despite his nerves. Over the past 3 weeks, he and Chloe had fallen into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. Weekly dinners where they coordinated their stories and checked in about how the arrangement was progressing. Occasional texts throughout the day, usually mundane updates about work or Emma, but sometimes veering into actual conversation about movies or books or the absurdity of their situation. They'd attended 2 family dinners at his parents' house, and Emma had started asking when Chloe was coming over again with the persistence only a 4-year-old could maintain. The boundaries Mason had tried to establish were eroding faster than he could rebuild them. He'd catch himself thinking about Chloe at random moments during surgery, wondering what she was doing or whether her mother had had a good day at Evergreen Hills. He'd started looking forward to their weekly meetings with an anticipation that had nothing to do with contractual obligations and everything to do with genuinely enjoying her company. And tonight, they'd be performing their most public charade yet, convincing 300 medical professionals and their spouses that Mason Hale had found love with a 3rd-grade teacher he'd met at a fundraiser 6 months ago. The doorbell rang exactly 20 minutes later. Mason opened it to find Chloe standing on his doorstep, and his breath caught in his throat. She wore a floor-length gown in deep emerald green that brought out the richness of her dark hair and eyes. The dress was elegant without being showy, sophisticated in a way that suggested she understood exactly what this event required. Her hair had been tamed into soft waves that cascaded over one shoulder, and she wore minimal jewelry, just simple diamond studs that caught the light when she moved. "You're staring," Chloe said, a nervous laugh escaping her. "Is it too much?" Rachel said it was perfect, but Rachel also thinks leopard print is appropriate funeral attire, so her judgment is questionable. "You look beautiful," Mason said honestly, and watched color rise in her cheeks. "Absolutely beautiful." "You clean up pretty well yourself." Chloe's eyes traveled over his tuxedo with appreciation. "Very James Bond." "I was going for competent surgeon, but I'll take secret agent." Mason offered his arm. "Ready to convince everyone we're madly in love?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Chloe took his arm and they walked to the car together, her hand warm in the crook of his elbow. The drive to the hotel was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Mason found himself hyper-aware of Chloe beside him, the subtle scent of her perfume filling the car, the way her hands fidgeted with her clutch purse in a tell of nervousness she probably didn't know she had. "You okay?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "What if I say something wrong? What if someone asks a question I can't answer? What if they figure out this whole thing is fake?" "Then we deal with it together." Mason reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. "But that's not going to happen. You're smart and charming, and you've already convinced my mother, who is harder to fool than anyone at this gala. Just be yourself and follow my lead when you need to." "Be myself while pretending to be your wife. Got it." But some of the tension had left her shoulders. The Meridian Hotel was already crowded when they arrived, valets handling a steady stream of expensive cars while formally dressed guests made their way inside. Mason handed over his keys and escorted Chloe through the entrance, immediately spotting several colleagues from the hospital. The moment they saw him with Chloe, heads turned and whispers began. "Here we go," Chloe murmured. "Smile and stay close," Mason whispered back, placing his hand on the small of her back in a gesture that was becoming automatic. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and carefully rehearsed stories. Mason's colleagues were universally curious about the wife he'd kept secret, and Chloe handled their questions with impressive grace. She remembered details from their fictional courtship, laughed at the right moments, and deflected invasive questions with the same gentle skill she'd used on Eleanor. Mason found himself watching her more than he watched the people they were talking to, marveling at how naturally she inhabited the role they'd created. She's lovely, Mason, Dr. Patricia Chen, the hospital's chief of cardiology, said during a quiet moment when Chloe had excused herself to the restroom. Very different from Natalie. That's intentional, Mason said, keeping his voice light. I learned some lessons from my first marriage. Clearly, Patricia's eyes were knowing. Word of advice? Don't let this one get away. Women like that, genuine, warm, unimpressed by status, they don't come around often in our circles. The assessment made Mason's chest tighten with guilt. Patricia had no idea she was praising a performance, complimenting qualities that were real but being deployed in service of a lie. When Chloe returned, Mason excused them from the conversation and guided her toward the bar. They ordered drinks they didn't really want and found a relatively quiet corner near the windows overlooking the city. Everyone keeps telling me how lucky you are, Chloe said, swirling her wine without drinking it. I've heard variations of "don't let this one get away" at least 6 times in the past hour. They're not wrong. The words came out before Mason could stop them, more honest than he'd intended. Chloe looked at him sharply. Mason? Dr. Hale, there you are. A woman's voice cut through their conversation, sharp and familiar, in a way that made Mason's blood run cold. He turned to find Natalie Chen standing behind them, elegant in a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His ex-wife looked exactly as he remembered, beautiful in a calculated way, with the kind of polish that came from expensive maintenance and rigid self-control. But there was something harder in her expression now, something bitter that hadn't been there during their marriage. Natalie, Mason's voice was carefully neutral. I didn't know you were in town. Conference at Northwestern. I'm presenting on a new surgical technique tomorrow. Natalie's eyes slid to Chloe with unconcealed assessment. And you must be the new wife. I've heard so much about you. Chloe Bennett. Chloe extended her hand with composure Mason had to admire. It's nice to meet you. Is it? Natalie shook her hand briefly. I suppose you and I have something in common. We've both made the mistake of marrying Mason Hale. The comment landed like a slap. Mason felt his jaw tighten, but before he could respond, Chloe spoke with unexpected steel in her voice. I don't consider it a mistake. But then, I actually want to be married to him, which I understand wasn't your situation. Natalie's smile sharpened. Oh, you're feisty. How refreshing. Mason always did prefer women with a bit of fight in them. She turned her attention back to Mason. I suppose congratulations are in order. Though I have to say, the timing is interesting. 6 months after we finalized the divorce, and you've already remarried? That's quite a turnaround for someone who claimed to be focusing on fatherhood. People change, Mason said evenly, and I met someone who made me want to make space for a relationship again. How romantic. Natalie's tone suggested she found it anything but. I hope you've warned her about what she's getting into. The long hours, the obsession with work, the emotional unavailability. Or have you magically transformed into a different person? I've learned from my mistakes, Mason said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Something you might consider doing yourself. My only mistake was thinking you'd ever prioritize anything over your career and your precious daughter. Natalie's mask of civility cracked slightly. I gave up a fellowship opportunity for you, Mason. I stayed in Chicago when I could have been in Los Angeles building the career I actually wanted. And what did I get for it? A husband who resented me for not being maternal enough, and a daughter I never wanted in the first place. Chloe's hand found Mason's, her fingers threading through his in a gesture that felt protective rather than performative. I think this conversation is over, she said quietly. Whatever happened between you and Mason is in the past. We'd appreciate it if you'd leave us alone. Natalie looked between them, something like genuine emotion flickering across her face before the brittle smile returned. Of course. Enjoy your evening. And Chloe? Good luck. You're going to need it. She walked away, disappearing into the crowd, and Mason felt the tension that had been holding him rigid finally release. His hand was shaking slightly where it gripped Chloe's. I'm sorry, he said. I should have warned you she might be here. I didn't think... It's okay. Chloe's voice was gentle. Are you okay? I don't know. Mason looked down at their joined hands. She's never been that hostile before. Even during the divorce, we were civil. She's hurting, Chloe observed. That whole performance was about pain, not anger. She gave up things for you, and it didn't work out, and now she's watching you move on with someone else. That has to be hard. You're defending her? I'm understanding her. There's a difference. Chloe squeezed his hand. But Mason, the things she said about Emma, I know. Mason's voice was rough. Natalie never wanted children. I talked her into having Emma, and she resented both of us for it. It was my fault as much as hers. That doesn't make it okay. Chloe's eyes were fierce. Emma is a gift, not a burden, and any parent who can't see that doesn't deserve the title. The words hit Mason somewhere deep in his chest, in the place where he'd been carrying guilt about his failed marriage and his role in bringing a child into a situation that was never stable. Chloe was looking at him with the same protective intensity she'd shown when defending him to Natalie, and Mason realized with startling clarity that she meant every word. Before he could respond, the lights dimmed and a voice announced that dinner would be served shortly. They made their way to their assigned table, finding seats with several other doctors and their spouses. The conversation flowed around them as courses were served, and Mason participated on autopilot while his mind replayed the confrontation with Natalie. Halfway through the main course, Chloe's hand found his under the table, her fingers warm against his palm. Mason looked at her, found her watching him with concern, and squeezed back in silent communication. We're okay. We're in this together. Whatever happens, we're okay. Except they weren't okay, and Mason was beginning to understand exactly how not okay they were. The revelation hit during dessert, while Chloe was laughing at something the woman across the table had said, her face animated and genuine in the candlelight. Mason was watching her the way he'd been watching her all evening, with an attention that had nothing to do with maintaining their cover and everything to do with the simple fact that he couldn't look away. And in that moment, with her hand still in his and her laugh filling the space between them, Mason realized he'd violated the single most important clause in their contract. He'd developed feelings for Chloe Bennett, real feelings, the kind that made his chest ache when she smiled and his stomach drop when she was upset, the kind that had him looking forward to their weekly dinners and checking his phone for her texts and thinking about her at random moments throughout his day, the kind that made the idea of this arrangement ending in 9 months feel like a loss he wasn't prepared to face. Mason excused himself from the table, mumbling something about needing air, and made his way to the terrace. The cool night air hit him like a shock, but it did nothing to clear his head. He'd been an idiot. He'd created an arrangement specifically designed to prevent emotional complications, included contract clauses to protect both of them, and then proceeded to ignore every warning sign as his feelings deepened from professional appreciation to something far more dangerous. The worst part was that he had no idea if Chloe felt the same way. She was an excellent actress, performing their relationship with such naturalism that Mason couldn't tell where the performance ended and genuine emotion began. Maybe she'd meant it when she kissed his cheek outside the hospital. Maybe she'd felt something when they held hands at his parents' dinner table. Or maybe she was just exceptionally good at her job, and Mason was a fool for confusing skillful performance with authentic connection. There you are, Chloe's voice came from behind him, soft with concern. You disappeared. Is everything okay? Mason turned to find her silhouetted in the terrace doorway, backlit by the golden light from the ballroom. She looked worried, her brow furrowed in a way that made him want to smooth away the lines with his thumb. I needed a minute, he said. After Natalie ambushed you, I'm not surprised. Chloe stepped onto the terrace, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool air. That was brutal. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. It's not about Natalie. The words came out before Mason could stop them, propelled by the weight of everything he'd been holding back. It's about us. Chloe went still. What about us? Mason took a breath, knowing he was about to detonate the careful structure they'd built, but unable to stop himself. I think I'm in violation of our contract. What are you talking about? Section 7. The revised clause about emotional entanglement. Mason forced himself to meet her eyes. I'm supposed to tell you if I develop genuine feelings. So I'm telling you. I have feelings for you, Chloe. Real ones. The kind that aren't supposed to happen in a temporary arrangement. The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe stared at him, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, and something else Mason couldn't identify. You can't, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason, you can't do this. Not now. Not when we're in the middle of this event with 300 people watching. Not when we have 6 more months of this arrangement and ending it early would... I know what it would do, Mason interrupted. I know the contract says we need mutual agreement to terminate. I know your mother's care depends on this continuing. I'm not asking to end it. I'm just being honest with you, the way we agreed. Honest? Chloe laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You want to talk about honesty? Fine. You want to know why I'm so good at playing your wife? Why I can hold your hand and smile at your daughter and convince your mother that we're in love? Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because I'm not acting, Mason. I haven't been acting for weeks. I fell for you somewhere between the coffee shop and Sunday dinner, and I've been terrified you'd figure it out because the contract says I have to tell you, and telling you means I lose everything. Mason's world tilted. What? I'm in love with you, you idiot. The tears spilled over now, tracking down her cheeks. I love the way you are with Emma, and the way you talk about your patients, and the stupid way you obsess over getting your tie perfectly straight. I love your terrible coffee order and your dry sense of humor, and the fact that you read the same bedtime story to Emma every night because it's her favorite, even though you're probably sick of it. She was crying in earnest now, her words tumbling out in a rush. And I hate that I love you because it means I'm about to lose my mother's care and the first real stability I've had in years, but I can't lie to you anymore. I'm done pretending this is just performance. Mason crossed the terrace in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, and Chloe came willingly, burying her face against his chest while her shoulders shook with sobs. He held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, feeling his own eyes sting with emotion. You're not going to lose anything, he said fiercely. The contract says we both have to agree to terminate. I'm not terminating. Are you? Chloe pulled back enough to look at him, her makeup ruined and her eyes red. What? The clause says that if we both develop feelings, we need to discuss it honestly and decide together whether to continue. Well, we're both guilty, which means we're both equally invested in figuring out what happens next. Mason cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears. So I'm asking you, Chloe Bennett, do you want to end this arrangement and go our separate ways? Or do you want to see what happens when we stop pretending and start being real? That's not how contracts work, Chloe said, but there was hope breaking through the tears. We can't just change the terms because we both caught feelings. Why not? We wrote the contract. We can rewrite it. Mason's voice was rough with emotion. Unless you don't want to. Unless this is too messy and complicated and you'd rather walk away clean. I don't want to walk away. The words came out fierce and certain. I want to stay. I want this to be real. I want to figure out how to turn a fake marriage into something that actually matters. Mason kissed her. It wasn't strategic or performed or designed for an audience. It was honest and desperate and full of everything he'd been holding back for weeks. Chloe's hands came up to grip his lapels, and she kissed him back with the same intensity, both of them pouring months of restrained emotion into the connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. We're probably both insane, he said. Completely insane, Chloe agreed, but I don't care. My mother is going to be insufferable when she finds out we're actually in love. Your mother already thinks we're in love. We're just making it true. Chloe laughed, the sound watery but genuine. Oh God, my makeup must be a disaster. You're beautiful. Mason kissed her again, softer this time. We should probably go back inside before people start looking for us. In a minute. Chloe stayed in his arms, her head against his chest. Let me just exist in this moment for a little bit longer. The moment where we're real and everything is terrifying but also perfect. They stood together on the terrace, the sounds of the gala muted behind them, and let the reality of what they'd confessed settle around them like snow. Inside, 300 people believed they were married. Outside, under the stars, they'd just admitted that the marriage they'd faked might actually be worth making real. Eventually, they made their way back inside, Chloe having repaired her makeup as best she could in the bathroom, while Mason fielded questions about her absence with vague references to a phone call from the babysitter. They rejoined their table for the final speeches and charity auction, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, hands linked under the table where no one could see. The drive home was different than the drive there had been. The nervous tension had transformed into something electric, both of them hyper-aware of what they'd confessed and what it meant for everything that came next. Mason pulled into his driveway and turned off the car, but neither of them moved to get out. "What happens now?" Chloe asked quietly. "Now we figure it out." Mason turned to face her. "We tear up the contract and start over. No performance, no arrangement, just two people who want to see if this thing between them can work. Your mother gets her wish. I become your actual wife instead of your fake one. Eventually, if that's what we both want." Mason took her hand. "But first we date, properly. We get to know each other without contracts or obligations or pretending for an audience. We figure out if what we feel right now is real or if it's just the intensity of the situation making us think we're in love." "I already know it's real," Chloe said softly. "But I like the idea of dating you, of doing this the right way instead of backwards." "So we're doing this? We're making this real?" "We're making this real." Chloe leaned across the console and kissed him, slow and sweet. "Starting now." Mason walked her to her car, not wanting the evening to end but knowing Emma was with the babysitter and reality was waiting. They stood in his driveway kissing like teenagers until Chloe finally pulled away with a laugh. "I should go before your neighbors call the police about public indecency." "Probably wise." Mason caught her hand before she could leave. "Chloe, your mother's care continues regardless. That was always non-negotiable, and it still is. This isn't conditional on whether our relationship works out." "I know, but thank you for saying it." She squeezed his hand. "Call me tomorrow?" "I'll call you tomorrow." He watched her drive away, then went inside to relieve the babysitter and check on Emma. His daughter was asleep, her room a disaster zone of stuffed animals and building blocks, completely unaware that her father's carefully controlled life had just been turned upside down in the best possible way. Mason sat on the edge of Emma's bed and watched her sleep, thinking about Chloe and contracts and the difference between what you plan for and what actually happens when you stop trying to control every variable. He'd entered into this arrangement thinking he could manage it like a surgical procedure, precise, controlled, with predetermined outcomes and minimal emotional involvement. Instead, he'd fallen in love. The following weeks unfolded with a strange mixture of continuity and change. To the outside world, nothing had shifted. Mason and Chloe were still the happily married couple who'd kept their relationship secret for 6 months before going public. But privately, everything was different. They went on actual dates, discovering each other outside the performance they'd been maintaining. Mason learned that Chloe cried at animated movies and had strong opinions about proper pizza toppings, and could quote entire scenes from her favorite books. Chloe discovered that Mason was hopeless at cooking anything more complicated than pasta, had a secret love of terrible action movies, and fell asleep within minutes of lying down no matter how much coffee he'd consumed. They told Emma together, sitting her down one afternoon and explaining in 4-year-old appropriate terms that Daddy's friend Chloe was going to be around a lot more because they cared about each other very much. Emma's response was to ask if this meant Chloe could come to her birthday party, then return to building a block tower with apparently zero concern about the complexities of adult relationships. Eleanor was predictably thrilled when Mason told her that his marriage to Chloe had started as something more complicated, but had evolved into genuine love. She didn't need to know the full truth, just enough to explain why they were now planning an actual future together instead of maintaining a temporary arrangement. 3 months after the gala, Mason and Chloe sat in his study with their original contract spread between them. "Should we burn it?" Chloe suggested, only half joking. "Make it ceremonial?" "That seems dramatic." Mason picked up the document, scanning the clauses they'd agonized over. "But maybe we should replace it with something better." "Like what?" "Like actual wedding vows, the kind people make when they mean them." Mason set down the contract and took both her hands. "Marry me, Chloe. Not fake married for my mother's benefit or contractually married for financial arrangements. Marry me because you love me and I love you and we want to build a life together." "We're already married," Chloe pointed out, her eyes bright with tears. "Legally, at least. We did file the paperwork to make it official for the arrangement." "Then marry me again. Properly this time. With Emma as flower girl and your mother there if she's able, and everyone we care about watching because they're genuinely happy for us, not because we're performing for them." Chloe kissed him instead of answering, which Mason took as a yes. They planned the wedding for 6 months later, giving Chloe's mother time in the hope she might have a clear day to witness her daughter's happiness. It was small and intimate, held in the garden behind Mason's parents' house with 50 guests instead of the hundreds Eleanor had originally envisioned. Emma walked down the aisle scattering rose petals with more enthusiasm than precision, and Chloe's mother sat in the front row looking confused but peaceful, occasionally smiling at something only she could see. Rachel stood as Chloe's maid of honor, and during the reception she cornered Mason at the bar. "I was wrong about you," she said without preamble. "When we first met, I thought you were either using Chloe or running a con. Turns out you were just an emotionally stunted doctor who needed a fake marriage to figure out what he actually wanted." "That's quite an assessment," Mason said dryly. "Am I wrong?" "Not even a little bit." Mason watched Chloe dancing with Emma, both of them laughing as they spun in circles. "For what it's worth, thank you. For protecting her and for giving me hell when I deserved it. She's my best friend. Protecting her is my job." Rachel clinked her beer bottle against his glass. "But you've earned your place. Don't mess it up." "I won't," Mason promised, and meant it with everything he had. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Emma had been put to bed at Eleanor's house for the night, Mason and Chloe sat on his back porch watching the stars. Chloe had changed out of her wedding dress into comfortable clothes, but she still wore the delicate gold band Mason had placed on her finger during the ceremony. "We did it backwards," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "Got married first, fell in love second, then got married again to make it real. We've never done anything the conventional way. Why start now?" Mason kissed the top of her head. "Do you regret any of it? The contract, the deception, the complicated way we got here?" Chloe was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret that we had to lie to people we care about. I regret that Emma got caught in the middle of our arrangement. But I don't regret meeting you at that wedding or agreeing to your crazy plan or falling in love with you while we were pretending to be married." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Everything that happened brought us here. I can't regret the path when I'm so happy with the destination. Even though the path included a contract that made love a breach of terms. Especially because of that." Chloe smiled. "That contract forced us to be honest with each other when we were both terrified. Without it, we might have spent months dancing around our feelings and never actually confessing. Sometimes the rules we create to protect ourselves end up being the things that push us toward what we actually need." Mason thought about that, about how the very clause designed to prevent emotional complications had ultimately forced them both to acknowledge what they felt. It was ironic in a way that felt almost poetic. "My father told me not to fall for you," he said, "back at the beginning when we were first setting up the arrangement. He warned me to guard my heart because this had an expiration date. Smart man. Terrible advice, though, because falling for you was the best thing I've done since Emma was born." Mason pulled Chloe closer. "You made me believe in the possibility of partnership again. You showed Emma what it looks like when someone chooses to love us without obligation or resentment. You walked into my complicated, messy life and decided to stay even when you had every reason to walk away. You gave my mother 6 more months of quality care and dignity," Chloe said quietly. "You gave me financial stability when I was drowning. You trusted me with your daughter and your family and your carefully controlled heart. We saved each other, Mason. That's what partnerships do." They sat together in comfortable silence, Chloe's head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the house, Emma's room waited with the new bed they'd picked out together, big enough for a growing girl who was already asking when she could call Chloe Mom. In the guest room, Chloe's things had gradually migrated from her apartment until moving in had been a fait accompli rather than a formal decision. This was real now. Not a performance or an arrangement or a contract with terms and conditions. Just 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and chosen to build something honest from the foundation of their shared deception. "I love you," Mason said, the words coming easier now that he didn't have to hide them. "Not because a contract obligates me to or because we're performing for an audience. I love you because you're brilliant and kind and brave enough to take chances on things that terrify you." "I love you too," Chloe replied. "Not because you're paying for my mother's care or because you offer financial security. I love you because you're a good man who made a questionable decision and then did everything possible to make it right for everyone involved. Mason kissed her, slow and deep, and felt the last vestiges of the arrangement they'd created fall away. This was what he'd been looking for when he crossed that ballroom and asked a stranger to pretend to be his wife. Not an escape from his mother's matchmaking or a temporary solution to an inconvenient problem, but this: connection, partnership. Love that started as performance and transformed into something neither of them had expected but both of them needed. The path had been unconventional, the methods questionable, the ethics dubious at best. But standing in his backyard with Chloe in his arms and Emma sleeping safely inside and a future stretching ahead that looked nothing like the carefully controlled plans he'd once made, Mason couldn't bring himself to regret a single moment of the journey that had brought them here. Sometimes the best things in life came from the worst ideas, executed with the best intentions, by people brave enough to admit when the performance had become real. And somewhere in a drawer in his study, a contract with expired terms sat forgotten, replaced by vows that meant everything and required nothing but the choice to keep making them, day after day, for as long as they both believed in the impossible thing they'd built together.